We are joined today by the Controller and Auditor General Seán McCarthy as a permanent witness to the committee, and he is joined by Orla Douane, Deputy Director of Audit. Apologies have been received from Deputy Pat Deering, Deputy Alan Farrell and Deputy Marc MacSharry. The minutes of the meeting of the 11th of April have been circulated. Are they agreed? Minutes agreed? Minutes agreed. No particular matters rising out of the minutes, and if there is, we can raise any other matters as the meeting progresses. So there will be no matters. So correspondence. We're straight into the correspondence issue now. And as I always say, there's three categories of correspondence. The first category is category A, which is in connection with today's meeting. They're the opening statements and briefing documents. So correspondence 2105 and 2117 from the Office of the Director General of the EPA are the briefing document and opening statement. So we note and publish those. That's agreed. Next item then is correspondence B from accounting officers and our ministers and follow up to previous PAC meeting. The first item is 2192 from Mr Ray Mitchell, Assistant National Director, Health Service Executive, dated 27th of March 2019, providing documents relating to the National Children's Hospital Development Board. This item was circulated and referred to and discussed at last week's meeting, but we just formally have to note and publish it now at this stage. There's other correspondence connected with that in a moment as I will come. So related correspondence. 2115 from Ray Mitchell, Assistant National Director, Health Service Executive, dated the 12th of April 2019, providing the information requested at last week's meeting in relation to the PwC report in relation to the decision-making process to proceed with Phase B of the new paediatric hospital and its subsequent role in carrying out a review of the escalation in costs. While we'll note and publish that, I want to comment on that because that's the issue I raised at the last meeting, and we sought clarification from the HSE on this matter, which I want to deal with now publicly because it's a matter that has surprised me when we saw this item of correspondence the last day, and I think it's a matter that hadn't been sufficiently highlighted at this stage, just hiding in plain sight. So essentially, the situation is we had a briefing note the last day. I'll call Deputy Cullinane. I want to set the situation on this. We had a briefing note the last day which we noted and discussed, and the report was entitled The New Children's Hospital Options for Going Forward. So in November 2018, and to support the decision-making process for the next stage of National Children's Capital Development, the HSE, at the request of the Department, considered the three options which we've all discussed: giving it to BAM to stay on site, putting it out to tender, or the third option, which they didn't want to pursue. And they sought specialist high-level input from a range of health, construction and procurement specialists in relation to providing information on this matter. When this report was produced, it was the decision of the government, not of any of the people directly involved, which was made in December 2018, to proceed with keeping BAM on site. That was a government decision. None of the people who provided information were obviously at the Cabinet table and part of the decision, but they had a fundamental role in providing information to the decision-making process, which resulted in the Cabinet decision to move forward. And in the document given us the last day here that we discussed, it was called, as the HSE document called, the New Children's Hospital Options Going Forward. And when we look inside the cover of that document, that was prepared in November of last year, we see the HSE, at the request of the Department of Health, has sought input from a range of advisors, including PwC. So we saw clarification. We have it verified here now from the HSE in the document that we're publishing today, this item of correspondence 2115B, that PwC were engaged in the process advising the HSE for the government decision in relation to what option to take as a result of the gross maximum price report that had been considered at that stage. Then we find in January 2019, PwC was commissioned by the HSE on behalf of the government to conduct a comprehensive review of the escalation of costs of the National Children's Hospital and the contributory factors associated with that. My view as the Chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, it was inappropriate of the HSE to request PwC to carry out that report, given that PAC, at the request of the HSE, only 2 months earlier, were involved in the process, reviewing the gross maximum cost and providing their professional and specialist input from a financial point of view to the HSE, which led to the decision for the project to proceed with ban, the decision being taken by the government. So my view is, as chairman of the PAC, which I alluded to last week, we saw confirmation, we have it confirmed now from the HSE, that yes, the PwC were engaged by the PAC in relation to the options going forward, and 2 months later, the same company was engaged by the HSE for, we all know, somewhere near €500,000 to examine the cost escalation. A gross conflict of interest as far as I'm concerned. The HSE were very wrong to commission PAC to do both reports. The PAC, in fact, or sorry, I should say the HSE knew about the conflict, and I haven't the full report here in front of me, but I'm recalling in that report, and Deputy Connolly highlighted this the last time, PwC were not requested to give conclusions as to the best options, but they have 1 page of conclusions in the report, as page 8, at the end of their executive summary, which they weren't asked to do. And in that conclusion, the only conclusion they arrived, they have a number of recommendations going forward, but the conclusion they arrived, they're saying at this point, the best option was to have proceeded with the option that the government decided to do. So here we have PwC in a report drawing a conclusion saying that the decision that was made as a result of their previous professional input to the earlier decision-making process was the correct decision in relation to proceeding. So I find it extraordinary that the HSE commissioned a report asking PwC, which facilitated PwC giving a conclusion saying that the earlier decision to proceed with the option they did of leaving BAM on site was the correct decision, given that PwC were professional advisors leading to that earlier decision being made. So we will be, when we're having the National Paediatric Hospital here in a couple of weeks after the break, we will certainly have the people from the HSE and the Department of Health in to discuss this conflict of interest. It's, you know, we know there's only a limited number of companies. They said they were on a procurement framework, but they should have had the knowledge not to appoint the same company 2 months apart to engage in different aspects of the same project. I think I've made my point clear, and Deputy Cullinane has indicated first, and then Deputy Connolly and Deputy Murphy.
Well, I would agree with your own observations first and foremost, and it seems to me that PwC was paid twice for the same advice, and that's the first thing I would say, and the taxpayer paid for it. But there's a contradiction in this letter or briefing note that we got from the HSE. It says that advice was given and that the advice was specialist high-level input. That's not low-level input. That's obviously very specialised high-level advice and input that was given by the HSE estates, and obviously they're obliged to give it PwC and then Northern Ireland Health and Social Care System. So there are 1 of 3 pillars that were giving very high-level specialist advice in relation to the 3 options. And this involved construction, procurement, and a lot of the issues then that subsequently were at the heart of the cost overruns. The last line of it then, where it says that the HSE is satisfied there is no conflict of interest. I'm not satisfied. I don't think you're satisfied. Other members of the committee can make their own minds up, but for me there was a clear conflict of interest in relation to it. And when it says, then, following the government's decision in January 2019, PwC was commissioned by the HSE on behalf of the government to conduct a comprehensive review that looked at contributory factors, associated responsibilities and potential weaknesses. So there's a breathtaking conflict of interest there, as far as I'm concerned, that on the one hand you can give that high-level input into a process and then be the organisation that comes and gives the so-called independent analysis. So that is a worry, and we had asked this very clearly, if you remember, before they proceeded with this, when they were before us, was there any conflicts of interest? So I would want more information from them. So I would want to know exactly what was the nature of this specialist high-level input. It's not good enough that they just give us a paragraph to say they provided high-level input. What was the nature of it? How much was PwC? How much did it cost for the advice that they gave? And what exactly were they advising, and at what senior level was it in PwC. So we don't know the volume of work the PwC did, but we can only take at face value what's here, specialist high-level input. But I think we need a much deeper breakdown of exactly what that is, because we need to be fair to the organisation as well. But on the face of it, I think anyone would see that if you're involved and there's also they're being disingenuous to say, well, they weren't involved in the subsequent decision making. Sure, of course they weren't. The government makes the decisions. I mean, that's a clear sleight of hand, and trying to pull the wool over our eyes. So, of course, any consultancy firm isn't involved in decision making, but they're involved in compiling reports, which helps the government make decisions, and the government rely on that advice. So, in that sense, they were at a level involved in certainly providing the process of the decision making, without a doubt, but they weren't the decision makers. And to say that's the justification, I think is a bit much in my view. So I think we need to go back to them and say thank you very much. We don't agree that there was no conflicts of interest. That's not the view well, we'll hear from other members, and the committee will obviously have to form a view. But I think we need a further breakdown of the costs, what exactly they did, and what input they had into the process.
Okay, Deputy Connolly and Deputy Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for raising this last week. And I had the report with me last week.
So
I don't have it today with me, and I think they're entitled to do any conclusions they like, but they weren't asked, and it didn't relate to the terms of reference. That was the point I made.
Or the contents of the report.
Or the contents of the report. Two matters. There was no evidence for what the conclusion they made, and it certainly didn't relate to the terms of reference. And I'm subject to correction on that, but I couldn't see where it related. They were the 2 points. Then we did ask prior to this, was there a conflict of interest, as the Deputy has said, and we were told no, there was no conflict of interest in relation to appointing PwC. I would ask, I raised it last night in the context of the debate and the Dáil, and what's worrying is that the Minister in the Dáil again has repeated that the PwC's conclusion, they're relying on that conclusion. They're being a little bit careful in saying it concurs with our own decision, but they're actually relying on the PwC conclusion that there was no option but to go forward. And that conclusion is quoted ad nauseum by various. That's what's worrying, that one. Then, as has been asked, what were they paid? Was there a written report? Did the PwC give a written report when they were asked for the high-level input? Number 3. Was the government aware, when they commissioned the PwC for the over £500,000 report, that they had already done a report? And just generally, I find that type of response most unhelpful. On a general level in relation to governance, when we get a line, as has been said, they weren't involved in the decision-making process, that's an insult really to the Public Accounts Committee. It would never happen that they would be making a decision, or we would even be in more trouble than we're in. So it gets more difficult really when this is the example being set on a repeated basis in relation to governance. So there are general implications from this. So back on the question, was there a written report? Were they paid? And was the government aware that PwC had been involved before they commissioned them again for over £500,000?
Deputy Murphy?
Yeah, I completely agree with the point that was made in relation to conflict of interest. And it's not only that there was a double payment, it's that it was information that was relied on then to make a decision, and government and anyone making a decision will want expert advice so that they can ground that decision. If that expert advice is in conflict, well, it causes a corruption of a process, in my opinion. I think it's really important that we get the correct people here in relation to the HSE who made the decision. We'll be told about Chinese walls, and to be honest with you, I'm fairly sick of listening to Chinese walls as a kind of an excuse why the same companies can be relied on. But we need to know what arm of the this company, was it the same arm of this company that did both pieces of work? And I suspect that it was, because there was a body of work done already. The procurement rules, it would strike me that there should be some procurement rules, and if there aren't, we need to be looking for those kind of gaps in relation to the commissioning of work. And, you know, it's not just a box to be ticked, it's a corporate culture that will avoid those kind of conflicts. We need to find out if there is such a procurement rules in relation to that, and how they consider that and how they manage that. We'll need to hear that from the HSE. So it'll have to be the right people that we have along, because this is of enormous importance. And only this morning there was a news item about the overdominance of the 4 big accountancy companies, and that was in relation to the UK. It's exactly the same here. I think there's also a question mark, which is a wider one than the Public Accounts Committee, but it's one that we might put in a report at some point. That do we actually design our rules that really don't allow more entities into that space, and I suspect that we make it much more difficult for middle-ranking firms to compete, and we need to look at that, because that would have a bearing on value for money.
Thank you. Finally, Deputy Cullinane.
Yeah, just an observation, because I think Catherine Murphy hit on a very important point. If there was individuals in PwC that were involved in both processes, then there's a problem. So if you had somebody that was involved in giving that high-level specialist advice, but also was involved in either assisting, preparing, signing off on, or writing the other report, then, and you're right in terms of there are arms of these organisations that specialise in certain areas, but then there's the individuals. So I think that's a question to ask as well. Was there an overlap, and was there any individuals in PwC involved in both processes?
Okay. So we've discussed the issue, and we're going to write to the HSE, and we'll raise the following specific points. First of all, we want to deal with the issue of conflict of interest in relation to PwC. There was a lot of public commentary at the time about PwC's possible conflict of interest from the BAM side, but the department should have been aware of this issue because it was very much in the public domain. So we want clarification of what steps they took in relation to potential conflict of interest. We want to know the nature of the specialist high-level input, and we want to know how much they were paid for that and the report, and if any staff. There might have been a different person signing off on the report, but if any of the staff were involved in both reports, we need to know that. And what did the PwC or what did the HSE do to ensure independence? I said we need a copy. We need a copy of that written report. So straight away, when we get on to the HSE, to get PwC's consent for that to be sent to us, rather than going through that rigmarole for another fortnight. We want to know, was the Minister and the Department and the Government aware of the fact that PwC were involved in the earlier process, or was the Minister not kept in the dark, and if so, why? Then we want to know, in relation to the report and the conclusion reached about it being that they concorded as the best option to proceed, the option taken was the best option. We want details of where in the report the evidence is, where in the report is there evidence to back up that conclusion. That's what we need to see. Is there any evidence in the report to back up the conclusion they gave? It just lands there on page 8. We need to know that.
It needs to be very clear, because we saw from the letter we got back they're being very vague. Yeah. So when they talk about high-level input, we need to know exactly what high-level input means.
We need to know it
needs to be very comprehensive,
very
comprehensive in both costs and exactly, precisely what that means. As Catherine Connolly said, is it written reports? I would imagine it is.
And presumably they were given a brief in relation. So we want to see the brief that were given, PwC were given in relation to being involved in that HSE earlier report.
Just, you know, when I highlighted the conclusion, and again today, it's actually written in a very strange way.
It is.
And I actually didn't quite understand the conclusion. Were they actually saying we're concluding, or were they referring back to the original decision that was made, where they concluded that that was the only option.
Yeah, and
it wasn't clear to me.
and
But what is clear is they've stuck it in again. So I'm not, I'm repeating now, but I'm not sure, are they actually categorically saying this is our conclusion, or are they actually referring back to the previous conclusion? I don't know. But either way, it's of significance.
We'll ask for that half paragraph in relation to the conclusion to be clarified, because I read it and there's a different tense. They're saying, at this time,
At that time.
at that time, which is past tense, and the sentence says it is the right decision.
Absolutely.
So they changed tense, which is extraordinary for a professional report. The first half of the sentence is back, and the second half of the sentence is the present tense. I find it not clear the way it's
confusing.
So you've spotted the same thing as well. I don't know what they're getting at, and we want clarification of what that actually means, because it doesn't actually even read clearly.
No.
It doesn't even read clearly. So then we want to know about the procurement framework. Now, what I do understand is that, obviously, like lots of public bodies, they have a procurement framework in place. Local authorities have it if they need to get work done. They have a group of people who are pre-approved as part of a tender framework, and they can call them at short notice because they're already pre-approved. But we want to know, in relation to this health issue, how many companies were approved on that framework? Was there only one, or were there several? And if there were several, why did they pick this one who had already been involved? And
in relation to that, there has got to be there's got to be some consideration of what consideration of a potential conflict is given to the selection of the company who will do the work.
And we want that, the HSE to clarify that. Okay, so look, we are asking for that to be back here. Now, we're not here next week, but we want it here. Maximum is 10 days. We want that reply.
And the right people in front of us.
And they will come as part of, we have a meeting scheduled with the National Paediatric Hospital Board after the break, after the Easter break, and I would say the key people from the HSE have to be here as part of that process, because we just find the Paediatric Board are well down the pecking order in terms of where the decisions get made. Okay, so that was the main item of correspondence. So the next item is 2101 from Rhonda Evans, Communication Manager, Rhonda Evans from the National Paediatric Hospital Board, dated the 10th of April. This is in response to our request to publish the Mazars report on their preliminary observations in relation to the construction of the National Children's Hospital. The Board has published this document and it is available on their website. We've discussed it before, so it's just that to allow us formally publish it as part of our agreement. And again, so we had PwC involved in November, we had a Mazars report on costs in December, and we have PwC coming back then in February to do another 3. So there's at least there's professional consultants been brought in month by month at this rate of going. Okay, so next item is 2102 from Cronin Goodman, Office of Secretary General, Department of Justice, providing material in relation to the Irish Naturalisation and Immigration Service and Reception Agency. This was provided in hard copy at the meeting last week, and we discussed it at length at the meeting. We were just formally noting the document at this stage. Next item then is 2103 from John Connolly, Assistant Secretary, Department of Employment Affairs, providing an evaluation of the Job Path scheme. At our meeting 29th of November, the Department undertook to forward a report to the committee when it was completed. The evaluation was in collaboration between the Department and the OECD. Concludes the Job Path scheme has been successful in helping job seekers not only secure employment but to improve earnings in employment. So we just note and publish that. People are free. We refer to this in our interim report, the Job Path issue. And these two documents now, we're publishing them. They may well be in the public domain at this stage, and for members to comment as to see fit. Deputy.
Yeah. I mean, again, what I'm concerned about is that there's been a lot of criticism of this. We're told 5% unemployment is really close to full employment, because obviously there's a bit of movement for people and so on and so forth. We're paying quite a large amount of money for this scheme, and judging by, I mean, people don't ring you up from across the country, not only from your own constituency, for no reason. And when you start hearing the same things from different places, there's a pattern. And I've got to say, I'm deeply unhappy with this scheme. And where it may well you know, the OECD may well look at it at a high level. How it's functioning in reality, I'm not sure that a lot of what's being done actually really does assist people to get work. What I'm hearing is that people are routinely come in, and maybe the routine is part of it. But they routinely come in. They're told to look up stuff that they could look up at home on websites. That there is the same. Matching people to employment sometimes is matching people to expertise or to kinds of employment that they don't have they may well have. I've come across people with pretty decent education that are being matched to, say, security. It just isn't. It's not the right fit, and it's not going to be a long-term sustainable thing. If this is going to be relied on, for example, to continue or to renew this process, I think there's way more than this that's needed, and I'm really concerned that it's kind of outsourcing a responsibility that really should probably be the responsibility of the department. Okay.
Deputy Cullinane, we're just noting the two reports, the working paper, the evaluation of job paths outcome for quarter 2016 printed by the department, and the other report, satisfaction with job path service providers. So,
I can declare a conflict of interest that I've called for job path to be scrapped. So anything that I say should be seen clearly in that context, Coherlock. But the 163 million was the total cost, and the numbers of people that were in full-time employment for more than 12 months were actually quite low. That was the issue that we had raised with them. And the other thing that needs to be put into context here as well, when they give us the figures, that we were in a recovery. There was a recovering economy. So naturally people were getting jobs anyway, and it's hard then to know and to be able to establish, well, how effective or what additionality job path brought even to those people who may have gone through the programme. But there are many, many people, and we all deal with them in our, I would imagine, our constituency offices, people who had very bad experiences as individuals is only one element of it. But we were looking at it more from a cost-effective perspective. Were we getting value for money? I don't believe so. I'm all for labour activation programmes that work, that add value, but it's very difficult to conclude in a recovering economy whether we got value for money. But I would argue no, given that there was more jobs being created naturally anyway in the economy, and the very low levels of people who were in sustained employment. In fact, I think some of them then went back a second time, went back through the same programme twice, which has to be noted as well. So, well, obviously the organisations will defend their spend and defend themselves. I wouldn't subscribe to the view that we got value for money. But given that I've called for it to be scrapped, I think that should be noted as well.
Deputy Connolly.
I certainly have serious concerns. I'm not sure how we can deal with that at the Public Accounts, and we all have our opinions. I happen to agree with my two colleagues. But maybe we come back to value for money, because how do we do that? Because it's not value for money. And I last 2 weeks ago I met the local employment scheme network in Galway. Serious problems on the ground in relation to this organisation, and then the quality service that they're given that's not measured. The quality of the services they're given on so many levels that have nothing to do with filling out a CV. And so those skills that they're empowering with people who perhaps will never hold down a full-time job, but will do other things as a result of the network on the ground helping them. They have to be put into the equation when we're valuing. And so now we look at this gobbledygook language. I'm just looking at this. Some disimprovement. Now this is a measure at the top, or a conclusion. Some disimprovement in the number of clients completely agreeing. So we're going to have agreeing and completely agreeing. That's on page 23. More than 3 out of 5 clients agreed that training courses were of good quality. So 2 don't. 2 out of 5 don't. 3 out of 4, more than 3/4 agree. The language is being used in a way to justify a scheme that's not indicating value for money. It's a misuse of language. So Chair, they're my comments.
Okay.
Obviously not here for personal comments, but I wouldn't be reassured that that's quality, value for money. And ultimately, that's what we're about. And if we're going to look at value for money, all the other criteria have to be taken into account that the organisations on the ground that are non-profit are doing and imparting to people on the ground and saving the state a fortune. That's value for money, in my opinion, where skills are imparted to help people lead an independent life. They mightn't hold down a job, but they're doing many other good things. So we can't cheer. So maybe with the help of the Controller and Auditor General in due course and yourself, we might look at how value for money is actually measured and what should go into that pot. And when we're not, you can't take that and say value for money and look at what the networks are doing. I've just forgotten the name, the local employment, LES. LES. What they're doing, it's not put into the pot to measure.
Counted as such.
No.
So there's a suggestion for the CNAG.
Well, no, just to tease out in some way. I haven't teased out.
It's not a request, it's a suggestion.
Members will recall that I did a chapter last year on job search, job path, sorry, but it didn't address the value for money issue. I was aware, and I did report, that they were undertaking these exercises. And we will look at those and perhaps come back to the committee in relation to
just in relation to
they're very complex and it'll take some time to kind of just look at the methodology and look at the conclusions and robustness of it. So it might be something to examine on the next occasion you have the Department of Social Economic.
Okay, what we can say is we included a chapter in our earlier periodic report on this,
yep.
Okay, in relation to job path. So what I'm asking the Secretary to do immediately is just to go back through our last couple of periodic reports. We have received the formal response from Deeper to our earlier one. Just a quick checklist. I don't think we've received a response from Deeper in relation to our last couple of periodic reports. Yeah, so we want to have it here when we're back in 2 weeks' time. To the earlier one, which I think covered this. So there will be a response from Deeper. I'm sure they'll refer to this. But we will have an opportunity when we get the minute from Deeper in relation, which will involve having consulted with the line department, we will have an opportunity very soon under our correspondence to follow up on the recommendations we made in our, I think it was our second last periodic report. And the reason I'm stressing I want Deeper to get these replies back, there was an unacceptable delay in replying to previous ones, such that we had recommendations made last year about matters being considered in the estimates. The department took so long to get the report back, they said, sure, the estimates are over now. So they're taking too long to respond to these reports. I know they're busy, but the public accountability, and it should be a key function of public accountability network that Deeper responds to the PAC reports in a timely manner. So we want those dealt with as quickly as possible. Okay?
Chair,
so, yeah.
I mean, this is a scheme that is due to be renewed or reviewed. Renewed, I think, or consideration of review. I think it's this year, but I could be wrong on that. Can we find out when that is the case?
Yes, and we'll ask the department. We'll write directly to the department on that one. Straight away as a result of these reports that we've received today.
And
what is the timescale?
I mean, if they're relying on that,
we know.
You know, and it's a lot of money.
Okay, and is there any rollover provisions, etc., or is it go back out to tender, or do the two companies have it? Yeah. Next item of correspondence is 2106 from Aidan O'Driscoll, Secretary General, Department of Justice, providing information requested by the committee following the previous correspondence in respect to the prison service. Updating, we asked for compensation in relation to cases of prisoners who had died from self-inflicted injuries while in custody in the last 2 years. We're told there have been no payments. Secondly, we asked about the outbreaks of tuberculosis in the Irish Prison Service, and the reply has come back. The State Claims Agency, the Department of Justice tell us the State Claims Agency has advised that they have received 100 Irish Prison Service claims in respect of tuberculosis. Of these, 66 were concluded on 25th of January 2019. And he has requested further information. So what we're requesting, and I think we'll write to the State Claims Agency, we want the the amounts involved and the estimate of dealing with the other existing cases. Those cases, 66, are now concluded. And was there any confidentiality agreement attached to those? Because I haven't seen that in public. And the State Claims Agency will be in before us in due course. And more importantly, we want to know what was the learning process for the prison service to make sure health issues like that are prevented. Not only did it not, was it not prevented, but it spread to 100 people at this stage. So we need a response to that. Next item then, we know to publish that. Next item is from an individual. It's reference 2115. 2116.
That's duplicate.
Oh, right, okay. 2116 is from Susan Lyons, Head of Regulation Housing Agency, dated the 12th of November, providing clarification which was necessary to the committee in relation to the number of housing units and a breakdown of the roles performed by the 10,000 staff involved in these bodies. So, in fairness, we want to note and publish this. What they are saying essentially is that many of the organisations that are approved housing bodies, it's only a small fraction of some of the work, some of the major charities, and they said that many of the organisations deal with several other issues, primarily funded by the Health Service in relation to patient care, health and social care, professional support, day services, respite services and management of administration. And to give a breakdown, for example, I just pick one. While there's 2,638 staff in the Irish Wheelchair Association, they have only 46 houses. So the way the information was presented the last time, it could have been interpreted that there's 10,000 staff in the charities dealing with it. They actually say there's 1,236, and they give a breakdown of 85% to that figure, which they were very easily able to do in relation to about 12 or 13 different major charities and the number of staff in each of those charities that are involved in housing. So out of the 10,000 staff in all those organisations, only 1,236 are involved in housing. So that's important, that we are doing an interim report or periodic report on housing shortly, and that's an important clarification of information. Next item of correspondence, we don't publish that, is 2093 from an individual to pursue an investigation into a matter that was raised with the PAC approximately 20 years ago. The correspondent is seeking the release of precedent test cases used by the Social Welfare Office to determine issues in relation to employment or self-employment or bogus self-employment. And he has been in touch with the Ombudsman's office, the Appeals Office. He's asked for the precedent from the High Court. Nowhere, I'm not sure, is that the precedent that they're using, whether it's internal or it's based on a court decision. If it's a court decision, it's in public, and I don't see any issue in that. But we're going to ask, right to the department, ask for the rationale as in relation to these test cases that they do rely on and the basis of them. There might be a good reason in the taxpayer's interest, and I stress that we're here to protect the taxpayer, not to publish all the information that they used to arrive at the decision, in case people knew how they were going to arrive at the decision and navigate another way around it at the taxpayer's cost. So we don't want them to release any confidential information that could be used against the taxpayer's interest, but we want the rationale, and we'll see what response we get and if we want to take it further at that, just the rationale for the test cases. So we don't publish that. Next item is 2099 from an individual alleging a wasting of public funds by the Road Safety Authority in relation to the production of a CD for people with disabilities. The amount was €35,000, but the person says that through the National Council for the Blind that this could have been produced at a much lower cost. So I think we should write to the Road Safety Authority. We've corresponded from an individual and from NCBI in relation to the manuals and in relation to particularly people with dyslexia who are taking these tests. So we will forward it to the Road Safety Authority and ask them for a detailed note and response on the matter. That's agreed. 2109 from an individual who had previously written to us in relation to the election roster, believes the information provided to the department is defamatory. The Secretary has reviewed the paragraph and no individual is mentioned. I propose we advise the correspondent to raise the matter directly with the Department. If the Department wishes to take their own legal advice on the matter and as a result wish us to put a correction on the committee record, we will be happy to do so. But we didn't identify anybody here. The person may feel they were identified, but they weren't identified by the committee. If it comes back to us through the Department to re-examine that matter, we can note what they request at that stage. Next item is from an individual alleging fraud and criminality in Meath County Council over public contracts to an alleged conflict of interest. We had similar correspondence in this matter, but the local authorities did not feel within the remit of the committee. So I think we write back to the correspondent just saying that the PAC does not have remit in this area, and to write to the local government auditor or the appropriate office that carries out the audit for local authorities. And finally then 2118 from Deputy Catherine Murphy in relation to a query for the CNAG in relation to reconciliation fund grant payments.
It's really only, I mean, obviously there's the money allocated to sporting bodies from a range of different government departments. This is a relatively small amount of money. It's just to check to see, you know, with things like that, are there spot checks done, essentially?
Deputy, the reference in your correspondence, it refers to spot checks of grants being done by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in relation to this reconciliation fund, and it also refers to a number of spot checks on reconciliation fund grant payments by my office. They would actually be two different things. The department in this case would have the option to carry out spot checks where it gives grants and where it makes that a condition of the grant. What we would be doing is looking at the department's controls over payment of such grants. I did check the transaction that's referred to there dates back a number of years. It's an amount of 25,000. The total spend on the subhead that came from was 9 million in the year. We didn't pick this one to look at the controls. But if your question is around whether we would carry out spot checks in organisations that are grant funded, the answer is no. Yeah, it's the that isn't available to me.
Okay, that's grand.
Just when you finish, I just want to go back to one letter.
Yeah, please do. Yeah, that's the end of the scheduled correspondence.
We went through on the 12th of April the very helpful letter from the regulator.
On housing.
PSC on housing.
Yeah.
Just if I could just make a comment on that, it's very helpful, and I thank her for sending that information. It's very instructive. But again, I go back to value for money, and alone on HAP, we know 431 million was the projected figure this year, alone on HAP, which is rising. And in addition, we have the RAS schemes, the long-term leasing, the short-term leasing. And then I look at this and I see COPE Foundation, COPE, I know it from Galway. I see they have 960 staff. They have 57 units just now. I know them as and I'm just choosing, I mean, Ability West, very good, and so on. I'm not commenting on that, but I'm looking at 960 staff dealing with homelessness, I thought. But they've actually only 57 units, but 960 staff. And I'm thinking of a city council struggling. I mean, actually, only last week I got a letter. They will not meet us. They have no, in relation to housing, can't meet, not enough staff, no place to meet. So somewhere in the middle of this, again, we might go back to Controller and Auditor General. Where do we deal with value for money? We've 10,000 people homeless. We have a housing crisis, and we have a list here of 10,000 staff.
People working in the charities.
People working in charities, glossy documents, a million things. You know, we obviously need organisations on the ground. I'm not commenting on that, but I'm commenting on use of money, value for money, and yet we have a crisis that's intensifying. So now, again, where's the balance between straying into politics and looking at value for money in relation to our housing programmes? But I'm really, it jumps out at me, 960 staff in COPE, 600 in Ability West, 2,000 teachers and so on. CARE, I don't know who they are, 433. Kildare, is it? Is that similar to CARE in COPE?
Yeah.
No, or is it a different?
It would be for a disability charity.
The Peter McVerry Trust 228 and so on.
Okay,
And in addition, sorry, then we have, was it the Ombudsman talking about no value for money in relation to the, well, not quite, he didn't put that language, modular homes, no assessment being done in relation to what they're actually giving. And 100 million, I think, was the figure used for modular homes. So I couldn't, it would be remiss of me to say somewhere here there is no value for money in what's happening and we're a crisis that's intensifying.
Could I just make a point on this as well?
Yeah.
I mean, part of our problem is we have huge fragmentation, and we have charities doing work that should be done by public service. The problem is that we're finding it hard actually to even get a coherent map of just exactly who does what and what's where. It's very difficult then to test value for money when you have that kind of fragmentation. And it's not that there isn't very good work done by all of these organisations, but they're doing the core work as opposed to, you know, additional work, if you like. And what you can get then is you can get a fragmentation of service as well, because if you have a good organisation embedded in one location, you may well get a different outcome, if you like. So it's the lack of coherence that is part of the problem, and there's a value for money issue for that, and there's a big reform piece needed here.
Okay. The deputies are correct. So in relation to those working on the housing side of it, that will come up in our periodic report, which we are not our periodic report. We said we'll try and do an earlier report on broadband and housing to deal with those two big issues that we've been dealing with over the couple of months. But we want to flag this for the HSE when they're coming in. Most of these organisations most of their employees are paid for through the HSE. It's clear from the schedule there. And they would be Section 39 organisations, and we need to maybe, there has been a lot of discussion on the Section 38s, but these Section 39s, I know they have improved their corporate governance, I know their service levels agreements in place across the board, but you're back to the situation of the HSE's policy of not providing, for example, home help. Everything is through agencies. Sometimes there's houses of 3 different agencies providing different levels of home help over the course of a week. And then we have a situation that the agencies can't recruit staff. So the HSE seems to have divested itself of its core activity. That's it's a policy of privatisation, full stop. They're consistently reducing the number of their own home health staff over the years and outsourcing it. So whether that's policy or not, it mightn't be for the PSE, but the value for money, and I think we will put that on our agenda when the HSE are in before the summer on their annual financial statement regarding the value for money paid for all these services that they've outsourced. So look at, you know, we have an opportunity to come back at this of value for money through those Section 39 organisations. Okay, and thanks, Deputy, for bringing us back to that particular item. So the next item, there's just one count to be noted that was laid in the Oireachtas over the past week. If we're able to just get that on screen, it'll just take a moment. And very straightforward, we don't need to have a discussion on it. It's the National Gallery of Ireland, a clear audit opinion. We move on as noted. Then the work programme, no significant changes since last week, so we'll discuss it again after the break. There'll be no other items. We're going to suspend for 3 minutes. What I did just mention that we're going to try, and we've agreed it already, that we will try and do the report on the broadband issue and the housing issue. And I'm asking the Secretariat, the minute we're back after the break, to have documents sent to us before we're back, so we can move immediately to clear those, if possible. You know, we'll discuss them when we see them. But the plan was just get those 2 sections out of the way, and then we resume our normal periodic report, you know, as soon as we get these 2 out of the way. So that's confirming an earlier decision. So we'll do our best to clear both of those as early as possible after the break. Okay, so we're going to suspend now for 3 minutes while the witnesses take their seat. Public session. And this morning we're meeting with the Environmental Protection Agency in relation to their financial statements 2017. We're joined from the EPA by Laura Burke, Director General, who is accompanied by Gerard O'Leary, Tom Ryan and Anne Harney. The representatives from the Department of Communications, Climate Action and Environment are Caroline Lyons and Aoife Byrne. Can I remind members, witnesses and those in the public gallery that all mobile phones are to be switched off entirely or else put onto airplane mode, as merely putting them on silent will interfere with the recording mechanism. I wish to advise witnesses that by virtue of 1721 of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect to your evidence to the committee. You're directed by the committee, which means by myself, to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter, and you continue to do so. You're entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You're directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you're asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person or persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him or it identifiable. Members of the committee are reminded of the provision of Standing Orders 186 that the committee shall refrain from inquiring into the merits of a policy or policies of the government or a minister of the government or the merits of the objectives of such policies. While we expect witnesses to answer questions asked by the committee clearly and with candour, witnesses can and should expect to be treated fairly and with respect and consideration at all times in accordance with the witness protocol. So we'll ask the CNAG, Mr McCarthy, for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Very briefly, the Environmental Protection Agency was established in 1993 and has been granted a wide range of powers and duties under the Environmental Protection Agency Acts 1992 to 2014 and other relevant environmental protection legislation. The EPA merged with the Radiological Protection Institute of Ireland in August 2014. The EPA is governed by an executive board consisting of the Director General and 5 directors who are all appointed by government. While the EPA operates generally under the aegis of the Department of Community, Climate Action and Environment, it also has a relationship with the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government, which has responsibility for drinking water, urban wastewater and water quality. The EPA's 2017 financial statements record total income of almost €71.2 million. State grant funding for the year totalled just under €50 million. Deferred retirement benefit funding recognised in income was a further €9.2 million. The EPA's operational activities, including licensing, enforcement, radiological and other activities, generated income of €12.3 million, about 17% of income for the year. Expenditure incurred by the EPA in 2017 totalled almost €69.6 million. Around 50% of the expenditure incurred related to salaries and retirement benefit costs. The agency reported an operating surplus of around €344,000 for the year. I issued a clear audit opinion in respect of the financial statements for 2017. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you indeed. And now, Ms Burke, can we have your opening statement? Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman, members, I'm pleased to be here this morning as Director General to assist the committee in its examination of the financial statements 2017 of the Environmental Protection Agency. I'm joined by Gerard O'Leary, the Deputy Director General, Tom Ryan is the Director of our Office of Environmental Enforcement, and Dan Harney, our Finance Officer. As requested, I have provided a briefing statement in advance of the meeting, so I will keep these comments short. The Environmental Protection Agency is an independent public body under the aegis of the Department of Communications, Climate Action and the Environment. As already indicated, the agency has a close working relationship with the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government due to their role in protecting and improving water resources. The agency's role operates across a number of key strategic priorities for Ireland. We have a wide range of functions under the broad headings of regulation, knowledge and advocacy. We perform a diverse range of activities, including environmental and radiological regulation, the regulation of greenhouse gases through the EU Emissions Trading Scheme, the provision of national greenhouse gas inventories and projections to both the EU and the UN, environmental research, environmental monitoring and supporting the circular economy. The agency's scientific expertise is recognised as a significant resource both nationally and internationally, and our work provides the scientific evidence that enables informed decision-making, better policy and better information to the public. Myself and the directors of the agency take our responsibilities with regard to corporate governance very seriously, and I can confirm that the EPA is in compliance with the Code of Practice for the Governance of State Bodies. We have developed and use a framework of assurances that include an Audit and Risk Committee, internal audits and an Executive Risk Committee. Since the EPA's internal audit structures were first established in 2003, 38 audits and value for money reviews across a broad range of operational areas have been undertaken. On an annual basis, I receive a report from the Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, who is external to the EPA, which is also presented to the Board. I take significant assurance from this report and the role of the committee in providing assurance that the EPA's risk management processes and its system of internal controls are operated effectively, that the major business risks are being managed and that the governance processes are working well. As Director General, I also take significant value and assurance from the unqualified audit opinion from the Controller and Auditors General on the EPA's 2017 accounts, and in fact for each year's financial statements since the EPA came into existence since 1993. As you can see from the EPA annual report, the total budget available in 2017 was €71.2 million. The funding from the agency comes from a number of sources, including Exchequer funding, the Environment Fund, the Water Services Programme, as well as earned income. Chairman, using the funds and resources available to us, the EPA had significant achievements in 2017 in delivering our mandate. I will just comment briefly on these. Firstly, with regard to regulation, during 2017, the Environmental Licensing Programme issued 108 decisions on environmental licensing and over 70 technical amendments covering, for example, large industry, waste facilities, dumping at sea and wastewater discharges. In addition, the team dealt with over 600 statutory consultations. In 2017, the EPA was named European leader in providing online access to licence and permit information, which is an acknowledgement of the importance that we attach to public participation in our decision-making. With regard to radiation protection, the EPA issued just under 300 licences. Over 1,500 visits to industrial and waste facilities took place in 2017, 320 inspections of urban wastewater sites and 57 drinking water site inspections. In addition, 29 prosecutions were heard during the year, resulting in fines and costs of €390,000. With regard to knowledge, the EPA continued to deliver on our key roles in supporting the implementation, monitoring and assessment of climate action through collating national greenhouse gas emissions and projections for the EU and UN, regulating emissions, providing the Secretariat to the Climate Change Advisory Council and through climate research. In 2017, the EPA funded €11.2 million in new environmental research projects, including many on climate issues. In 2017, we continued our very successful public climate lecture series, while more recently we've taken on a facilitation role in the National Dialogue on Climate Action. In 2017, the EPA issued a number of reports on water quality, including National Assessment of Water Quality and reports on bathing water quality, private drinking water supplies, urban wastewater treatment, the National Inspection Plan for Domestic Wastewater Treatment Plants and drinking water quality. We issued a report on air quality and developed a new National Ambient Air Quality Monitoring Programme with the ambition of significantly increasing the availability of localised real-time air quality information. Lastly, with regard to advocacy, the EPA plays an important role in raising awareness levels and supporting initiatives that increase citizen science engagement with environmental issues. The Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment of the Globe programme is an international science and education programme that provides school students with the opportunity to participate in data collection and to contribute meaningfully to the understanding of the Earth system and global environment. GLOBE was relaunched in Ireland in 2017 and this two-year pilot programme is managed by Antashka in partnership with the EPA. The National Waste Prevention Programme, led by the EPA, works to foster the circular economy in Ireland, including advocating for waste prevention and using resources more efficiently. During 2017, initiatives were promoted to homeowners, businesses and other sectors, which include the EPA's Stop Food Waste programme and the Food Waste Charter. This food waste charter is a collective commitment to reduce food waste along the entire supply chain, and 5 major retailers signed the food waste charter in 2017. So to conclude, Chairman, the matters I have referred to illustrate the broad range of programmes and activities for which the agency had responsibility in 2017. Ireland has a precious and unique resource in our natural environment, and it's something we are rightly proud of. Our environment, however, faces significant threats, and we in the EPA will continue to prioritise valuable resources to address these threats. And of course, I and my colleagues will be happy to respond to questions or issues that emerge during today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Burke. And the lead speaker today is Deputy Cullinane, who will have 20 minutes, followed by Deputy Connolly, who has 15 minutes, and other speakers have 10 minutes each indicated in the following sequence: Deputy Catherine Murphy, followed by Deputy Catherine Connolly. Deputy Cullinane.
You might let me know when I have 10 minutes left. Just a number of issues I want to get through. So thank you, Ms Burke and your team, for being here. I just had a number of questions first in relation to the 2017 annual report, which we were submitted. It talks about enforcement charges on page 84 of 8.9 million. So firstly, is that how much was invoiced, or is that how much was actually recovered?
So just so I have the exact information for you, it's thanks, Tom. So with regard to invoicing, we invoiced 8.9 million euros, and my understanding is we collected 97% of that sum of money. So that was pretty much full collection of charges invoiced.
Okay. Does bad debts or write-offs occur in those situations?
We have an allowance for 3% bad debts that we review as the year goes through. And if there are debts, what we do is we engage with the companies, and if we're not successful, ultimately we go to legal action, and in that way recoup monies.
And how many cases in that year would there have been?
How many cases we sent was that 3%, less than 3% we would have sent for debt collection, and then with regard to the actual collection of that.
Yeah, but in terms of cases?
Cases, number of companies.
Would it be small numbers?
Oh yeah, so we're only talking about a couple of companies, yeah.
Okay. And the charges themselves then, these enforcement charges, are they cost recovery charges, or are they fixed fees, or what way are they calculated?
They are cost recovery, and we do it with different ways for different companies. Sorry, I just want to, again, just grab the figures. So for the enforcement charges, we would be up at around 95–96% cost recovery. As you can imagine, particularly in enforcement, there can be issues with that unanticipated work happening at a site during the year. With regard to licensing charges, so that's the fees for applications coming into the agency, the cost recovery is a lot lower. It's probably in around 10–15%, and those are charges for applications that were set really back in 1993 and 1996. So therefore, they haven't been increased since then,
okay.
And so the cost recovery is much, much lower.
Okay, there was also 7.341 million incurred in respect of what's called contractors and external service providers, and then grants totalling 1.21 million. So who are these external service providers? Can we have just a bit of a breakdown on that? And if you want to give us a note afterwards, a more detailed note, that might be more helpful. But in terms of the listing, so it's external contractors and contractors and external service providers. So a breakdown as to who they are.
Yep.
Well, we get that information first, and then the 1.2 million to 1.21 million in grants.
Okay. I suppose two things. First of all, just with regard to the consultants and advisors engaged, that's listed on page 60 of the EPA annual report. So you'll see the broad range of consultants.
I have it. That's a later question. I've separated consultancy from what was contractors and external service providers.
Okay, so on the contractors and external service providers of the 8.5 million, 1.29 million of that is actually for the Marine Institute for Water Framework Directive Monitoring, and this is money that
How much?
1.249 million.
Marine Institute.
Marine Institute.
Yep.
And that's for Water Framework Directive monitoring. And sorry, I just want to grab. And that's under. We have a memorandum of funding with the Department of Housing, Planning and Local Government on the Water Framework Directive monies that they assign us and how we spend it. And one of the aspects of that is for us to supervise the role
I'm going
of the
to get
Marine
to
Institute.
wastewater later. I have a number of questions in relation to that.
Well, sorry, this is actually on the memorandum of funding. It's money given to the agency in order to do our water framework directive, so it's separate to the Irish water side of things. So it's to do monitoring on the water environment. But as I said, part of that is a subcontract out to the Marine Institute to do work, and they've.
And that was my point. In terms of that over 8 million, is that basically the EPA subcontracting out or outsourcing work that it's not in a position to do itself? So when it says contractors and external service providers, the obvious question I would have is, well, why is the expertise not there in-house? Why do we have to outsource that level of cost and that level of spend? Is there an issue in relation to skills within the EPA to do this, or is it that it's felt that it's better to get an external service provider to do it? What's the rationale for it?
Just so I said 1.2 million is the Marine Institute, and that's just that I would deal with that's separate. So with regard to the others, it is things, for example, like funding under the National Waste Prevention Programme, and that by its very nature is an outsourced model in that we identify key things to be done, and we work with, for example, the local authorities and with others to do some that work at local level. I suppose to answer your question, and we also would work with other companies, for example, to do some work on waste characterisation. That was one of the big projects that was identified.
No, I understand what you do, but it's why it's done. Why is it done in that way? Because we look at value for money. So if we're spending millions of euro on, if your organisation is subcontracting out work to be done by outside organisations, I would just like to know why that's being done. Is it for the purpose that you feel that you want to get independent outside analysis or views, or is it that you just don't have the expertise within the organisation to do it, or is it both?
We certainly have expertise, with 411 staff expertise, but the model, if there's a couple of different models. Like one of the models would be for once-off types of work, like that waste characterisation, which is why I mentioned it, and that, in the context of value for money, it's something that we would only do once every large number of years. So trying to get in resources to do that in the agency on a temporary basis, and then that being finished wouldn't be value for money. So it is a better use of money in order to outsource it. In other areas, again, I would say it's not a question of not having the resources, but it's more appropriate that things will be done, for example, through the local authorities or the county councils with regard to resource efficiency. So it's a deliberate model and in order to do it. If you ask me, Deputy, do we have enough staff to do all of the work that we have to do, I'd say myself, like every other public service body would say, no, in all honesty, and we currently have a workforce plan with the Department of Communications, looking in particular at new work as it comes down the track and saying, well,
but that's my point, as the head of the organisation, and you're looking at a spend of over 8 million on outside contractors and external service providers. At a strategic level, have you examined whether or not there might be better value for money in getting in-house expertise to maybe do some of this work in the future? I understand on one-off projects that might be very specialist, it might make more sense to do it using the model that you do, but have you examined this? And you said that, you know, obviously every organisation or department or subsection of a department would say they want more staff. But in terms of that particular spend, which is quite high in terms of your overall income and your overall spend, have you looked at and have you reviewed that overall spend on external contractors in the context of then going to the department and saying, actually, more money for us to do this in-house would be more cost effective?
We do that on literally on an annual basis in the context of workforce planning. What I can say is that I'm certainly satisfied that the money that we spend on external resources and the model we use in different areas, because it's a different model in different areas of the organisation, is fit for purpose, and we are satisfied with it. There's areas where it's suitable to outsource, and again, I'd use the National Waste Prevention Programme. There's other areas that we won't outsource. So our core licensing function, for example, or enforcement of and inspections of industrial facilities is one that we wouldn't be outsourcing, whereas other areas it's suitable. So we look at that, Deputy,
okay,
on a regular
it's not
basis.
a critical question in terms of it's not a critical observation. It's more a curiosity in terms of what the breakdown is. So maybe you could provide the committee with a detailed breakdown of these contractors and external service providers. Who are they? What work do they do? And maybe we can have a look at that ourselves.
Absolutely.
And then you mentioned consultancy costs. So I think there was 305,000 in 2017. 155,000 of that was related to the Office of Communications and Corporate Services within the EPA, as far as I can see. But again, in terms of consultancy costs, what is the nature of that, of these costs? Yep.
Two key areas I'd highlight of that. First of all, we would have radiological consultants, and as I said during my opening statement, we have, since the merger with the RPII, we have a function in regulating radiological facilities. Even this house, for example, as you come in and you go through the screening, it has to be licensed by the EPA. But the changes in technology are happening all the time with regard to both hospitals and other businesses and what technology is being used. So we do use consultants to support and advise that radiological function. And that's around 70,000 of the 305,000 that you identified. In 2017 as well, and the other thing I mentioned in my opening statement is the importance of communications. And in 2017, we spent €60,000 on a complete review of our website. So that's a substantial sum of money, but as our main tool of communication to people, it's important that it's as user-friendly as possible. So we reviewed that. And as an example, we get 1 million hits on the EPA website. So that, I said, that was a sum of money. And again, I think that's suitable for an external view, because if we look at our website, we'll have a particular view. If others with that expertise look at it in a kind of...
No, that's fair enough, and that's okay. I want to move to wastewater if I can, because I was reading the Urban Wastewater Treatment in 2017 report, which is in many respects quite a damning report in terms of wastewater infrastructure. We're lucky in my own county of Waterford, we have a very high quality wastewater infrastructure, but the report, is that the most recent report, or was there a subsequent report? Because I know some improvements have been made since, but is that the most recent EPA report? The 2017 one, is the urban, this one here?
Yeah, it's published in 2018. Yeah.
20, okay. And its findings were 28 of the 179 large towns and cities where wastewater treatment did not meet mandatory standards set to prevent pollution and protect public health. 38 towns and villages where untreated wastewater flows into the environment every day. 57 areas where wastewater is the sole threat to rivers, estuaries, lakes and coastal waters, a risk of pollution. 3 urban areas where upgrade works are needed to protect beaches with poor quality housing water. 15 towns and villages where improvements in wastewater treatment are needed to protect critically endangered freshwater pearl mussels or to safeguard shellfish habitats. And 13 priority wastewater collection networks or sewers that need to be upgraded. So an awful lot of money obviously needs to be spent and an awful lot needs to be done. But from a Public Accounts Committee perspective and a value for money perspective, the EU Commission also commenced infringement proceedings against this state for our failure to meet obligations. Is that under the Wastewater Directive that you mentioned earlier? Okay. So was it in 2013 they commissioned the infringement proceedings?
It commenced, and it's, I'm sorry, I was just looking at the EU. Sorry, just because I can give you the detail. Well, it was based on situation 2016.
When did the Commission commence their infringement proceedings?
2016 is my understanding now, but I know that they declared in March of this year they declared that Ireland had failed to fulfil its obligations, so it's now at that stage.
My understanding is that they commenced the proceedings in September 2013.
Okay, we can come back. As I said, I'm looking at the most recent.
One of your colleagues know, because it's important when
it commenced. It was based on information in 2016.
Who was the minister at that time, 2013?
No, you'll have to I can't tell you.
Hey, she doesn't know.
We've had a few. I can't tell you who was 2013. I genuinely don't remember from year to year, so you'll excuse me that.
It's been a very uneventful minister.
But I suppose the key thing, you're mentioning with regard to the urban wastewater report, something that we have been saying for a long time, is this legacy of underinvestment in our wastewater treatment. So there's a huge amount of investment that actually needs to take place in wastewater treatment in order to get us up to standard. What we've seen since Irish Water was established, on the drinking water side, certainly have seen a lot of delivery there. We've seen a reduction. One indicator is the number of boil water notices, not the only indicator. But what we've said, and we've said very publicly, including in the report, you indicate that Ireland isn't addressing the deficiencies in wastewater treatment at a fast enough pace. Now, Irish Water...
Can I just ask where those infringement proceedings are at this point in time?
Well, that's what I've said. There's been a finding against Ireland in March of this year.
And what does that mean then? What's the next step in that process? If they find against us, is there fines attached to that automatically? Or is it that there's another process where we have another chance to invest before they kick in? What's the process? Have we already incurred a cost?
We no. Again,
we haven't incurred a cost, but at some point we may. So,
exactly.
Do you understand that process? What happens next?
Sorry, we have all of the details of it. With regard to the process, that process is managed by the department. My understanding is there's further engagement with the Commission, and ultimately there may or may not be daily fines, but the department themselves are engaging with the Commission with regard to that, because it's Ireland Inc. What we're doing is providing the scientific information with regard to what's the status and with regard to wastewater treatment, but the department look after the policy.
But that's your role. So your role is that you would provide the report to the department to say, listen, we have problems here in these towns and cities and in certain areas in terms of wastewater. These are where we're not meeting our obligations. But is it the case then that the reports and the reports that have been given to the department, are they being ignored, or is it that just the investments are not being made? Because if it got to a point where you've been pointing this out consistently pointing this out, that we could end up being taken to court and fined by the European Union, it would make more sense to make the investment rather than having to pay fines.
Well, absolutely, we're in complete agreement on that. I suppose, to be clear, our report is to Ireland Inc. It's not the wastewater quality report or the urban wastewater treatment report that we publish is a national report. It's not to. It feeds into, of course, department, etc. But it is not to the department as an only audience. With regard to pointing out the failures, yes, that's the role of the agency, is to say this, based on the scientific evidence, this is where we're at now. We have highlighted the non-compliance with the Urban Wastewater Treatment Directive. We've also highlighted more recently, I suppose, and this is where I was indicating that although there's been significant progress on the drinking water side of things, with regard to urban wastewater, we've seen less progress, and the pace of
Is there any working group or interdepartmental group that the EPA would sit on in relation to this issue? Because it strikes me this is a long-running issue. It also strikes me that maybe investment was cut during the austerity years, which potentially had an impact. My understanding was that in previous committees, the housing committees, 620 million was being made available from 2017 to 2021, and that was a reduction from 1 billion that was the original intention. So is there an interdepartmental group that looks at the investments which are being made and whether or not we're actually making the sufficient investments now to ensure that we can satisfy the framework and the directive so that we don't end up in fines? So I know you're saying you publish a report, it's a generic report, it goes to everybody, you just publish a report. But aside from that, what's the engagement that you would have with the department on that issue?
There's a number of different committees, including there's an outputs monitoring group for Irish Water that includes a number of bodies, including not only ourselves but also the Commission for Regulation of Utilities, who's the economic regulator of Irish Water. And there's also, and I'm trying to remember the title of it, there's a recently established committee that was the result of the Joint Oireachtas Committee report on water charges. And that's also looking at, that is chaired by Paul McGowan of the Commission for Regulation of Utilities. The EPA sits on that. And that they're also looking at delivery by Irish Water, because I suppose it's a combination of things. We're saying we're not seeing delivery fast enough. We're saying we're not seeing delivery, particularly in urban wastewater, fast enough. And the other aspect of it is to make sure that the money that is spent efficiently. So it's a combination of you need the money, but also you need to make sure the money is delivering in the right areas.
Given that in your own organisation, the buck obviously stops with you.
Yeah.
And if I was to ask you then directly as the head of the EPA, are you satisfied that the investments are being made in this area to ensure that we can reach our obligations under the EU Framework Directive and that we can avoid fines or penalties or costs from the Commission or from the European Union? Are you satisfied, given all of the reports and the information that is being given either indirectly or directly to the Department by your organisation, are you satisfied that they've been listened to, and are you satisfied that the investments which are necessary are being made so that we can avoid being fined? Would you be confident that we won't be fined?
I can't say whether we'll be fined or not, because
But are you satisfied that the investments are being made and the issue is now being sufficiently addressed?
I would say exactly as we've said in our reports, the issues are not being addressed at a fast enough pace.
But that was 2017, that report published in 2018. I'm asking that, has there been any dramatic investment since? Has there been an increase or more of it, has more attention been paid to this issue in recent times that would lead you to think that maybe the Commission would be more satisfied, or would they be less satisfied or the same in terms of where you were in 2017 when that report was done?
Well, I suppose, first of all, I can't speak on behalf of whether the Commission will be satisfied with something or not. What I can say with regard to the agency, which is what we said in the report, and there is no dramatic change since then, to answer your question of are we satisfied that urban wastewater legacy issues and the historic underinvestment have been addressed, we would still say it's not happening at a fast enough pace. And if Irish Water are to meet their commitments that they had said was to invest an average of €326 million a year on urban wastewater infrastructure, so that's just the urban wastewater side, they would need to be investing approximately €1 billion in the period 2020 to 21 in order to meet their commitment. And I suppose that's what we're following as well.
But they're not. That's the point.
They would need to. I said, but in the period 2020 to 21, they would need to be doing that. And
okay, they would need to, but they're not. So essentially, then your main critique hasn't changed. The substance of that 2018 report hasn't altered in terms of your analysis of where this issue is.
The overall substance of it, it is not happening at a fast enough pace. That stays the same.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy. And next speaker is Deputy Connolly, 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming in. Just looking at your remit here, it involves monitoring of intensive agriculture practices. Could you just for me elaborate on in terms of, it specifically mentions pigs and chickens. Have you data? Are you collecting data? What sort of data are you collecting there? A lot of the antibiotics that are going into pig feeds and chicken feeds are powdered antibiotics. So are you looking at distribution in the local air? Are you looking at the waste produced by the pigs and the chickens? Is that waste being used as fertiliser on land? Really what I'm getting at is the pathway of antibiotics into drinking water is really where I'm going with this. So I'm just looking to, if you could elaborate on what you're exactly doing in the chicken and poultry and pigs in monitoring in terms of what's your role and what are you specifically measuring?
With regard to intensive agriculture, this comes in under the Industrial Emissions Directive, so it's directly from EU requirements, and it is looking at intensive agriculture where there is a large number of chickens or a large number of pigs of different types, etc., all contained within a specific area. And our role is very specific to the site itself, so where the intensive agriculture is happening, and it's looking at emissions. So we'll be looking at, for example, things like ammonia emissions, things like impacts potentially on water quality in the area, those types of emissions of environmental pollutants. where we, I suppose, where in the context of regulation, it's ensuring.
Sorry, are you monitoring the powdered antibiotics in the air and the powdered antibiotics that are falling out of the chicken's trough or whatever way you feed a chicken? Are you monitoring the waste produced, the pig slurry or the chicken? I don't know what you do with chicken waste either. But are you monitoring that product that's been produced that I would suspect has high levels of antibiotics and that's been spread on land, perhaps near water supplies? Specifically asking you that. Are you monitoring those antibiotics?
That, with regard to that regulation, the role of the agency is not in the antibiotic side of things. That's with the Department of Agriculture and Food. However, where we would feed in on the antimicrobials and the antimicrobial resistance area is there's a specific national plan on antimicrobial resistance, and the agency has fed into that plan and will be on the working group of that plan identifying environmental aspects, and have also done research in this area as well. But
So
in the industrial emissions, it's not within its remit.
So if, hypothetically speaking, there's a pig farm or pig sheds and there's high use of antibiotics into the feed, and that byproduct, the pig slurry, is being spread on a field beside a river, it's not your problem, it's somebody else's. Is that really what you're telling me?
It's not that it's not our problem.
Well, it's
not
everyone's
our remit.
problem. But it's not your job.
Yes.
It's AG's job.
It is Department of Ag, and there has to be. However, in the context of assessing any intensive agriculture activity, as part of our assessment, we have to look at what would be happening with the manure being produced, and the producer would have to demonstrate to us that they have sufficient lands for land spread in that material, and that it will comply with the requirements of the Department of Agriculture. But I think it's important here that there's not a duplication of roles between ourselves and Department of Ag.
Yes, and I believe that's important, but it's also important that nothing falls between
Absolutely.
two stools, and that's really where I'm going here. In terms of back at water quality and urban water quality, I just couldn't download them here, but there was a number of reports recently about high quantities of illicit drugs in urban water. I think London, I think the eels were behaving bizarrely in the Thames at some point. In terms of our urban water supply, I know that I'm deadly serious. There's a number of European countries where drinking water has been found to have a quantity of drugs, be they illicit or otherwise, in them, which I'd be very concerned about in terms of fetal development and in terms of just regular development. Have we data? Have we any issue with that in any of our urban centres? Or are you looking at that in light of other European countries? I think Amsterdam and London, I think there was 4 of them, but just from memory. Or are you testing for that?
I'd have to come back to you on that, because there's particular requirements under the testing, and we test for a wide range of different materials in drinking water. But with regard to the specific question, we can come back to you. I think it's the easiest to come back to the committee, so I'd like to give you full information back on it.
Thank you. In terms of just the cost of running the agency, I can imagine that travel expenses are very, a big cost, and I assume people have to go places to test things. But in terms of the board's costs, just shy of 90,000 travel and subsistence for the board, which I think is 1 + 5. Where were they going and what were they doing for 90,000 in a year?
Okay. The board of the agency is, I suppose, different maybe to the boards of other organisations in that it's an executive board. So each board member has an executive. It's a full-time job. So with regard to where board members would be going, first of all, the first thing I should say is that all travel and subsistence is paid in accordance with the Civil Service Department of Finance codes. People are maybe going, for example, we've 5 regional offices around the country, and so board members will be going to those offices, meeting up with their staff. Each of the teams have staff of approximately 100 people. So they will have to be meeting with those, visiting those. We also will be going to at an international level. There are EU meetings. There's meetings of the European Environment Agency where the EPA is very active. A meeting with other, whether it's particularly in the context of Brexit, meeting with our UK colleagues, ensuring consistency of work that is happening, and also meeting with other EU colleagues. So it's in the normal course of their everyday work, which as I said is different.
There's no holidays in the K Club or anything or anything.
I was going to say unfortunately not, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean,
absolutely not.
Thank you. Leasing arrangements for the premises around the country that are being used, is the rent and rates is 750,000. Or do we own the buildings? Are we renting them? Is there any new buildings come into operation, or is this just keeping the show on the road in terms of offices? Again, I'm just trying to make sure we value for money and there's no expensive, badly measured premises emerging or anything like that. So just in terms of what that money is going on, if you wouldn't mind to elaborate.
We've, as I said, we're regionalised and we've offices around the country, and we've got a combination of our own premises. So, for example, our headquarters in Wexford is owned by the state or owned by the EPA. We also have our own facility in Monaghan, if I remember rightly, and then we lease from Mayo County Council our Castlebar office, and that's a long-standing arrangement. We also own our building in, and when I say own again, it's the state owns our building in Kilkenny. And I'm trying to remember, oh yes, the last is just with regard to our buildings in Dublin. We have a licence agreement with UCD. We're based on the Richview campus, and again that's long-standing. I think that's probably around 15-20 years old at this stage. But what we have done was, when there was the merger between the EPA and the RPI rented building actually on the same campus. So we've continued on that rental agreement. We did go out last year at the time of the term of the rental agreement was up for renewal. We went out and we actually got advice on the status of the amount we were paying for rent, and we got assurance that from an independent estate agents that the amount we were spending was not in excess of what we.
This is on the UCD site.
Exactly.
And obviously, I assume there'd be an added benefit there to being beside the radiological people and all the other stuff that's going on in UCD.
And that was one of the key things I'd have to say with regard to the merger is, and the mergers are notoriously difficult, but actually having all of the staff within 2 minutes of each other makes life an awful lot easier. And also what we've done there is moved people from building to building, so it has meant that there's not really disruption for staff, but it's meant a much better integration of staff across the agency.
And in terms of the merger, has there been any rationalisation of staff? So in terms of everyone being nearer and all of that, has it led to any sort of efficiency in terms of reduction in staff, so we don't have duplication of roles?
Yeah. I suppose one of the things when the merger was being considered back in 2010, it was one of the things that was identified at that time was there was no duplication of work between the EPA and the RPI, and that it wasn't identified that there would be any significant savings. So I should say that up front. However, what I would say is, in the context of the merger, we've identified a number of opportunities. For example, simple things like only one receptionist in the Dublin campus rather than there would have been 2 receptionists, which is a saving in itself. We've also, with regard to our water and laboratories side of things, we have now 1 manager for the water and radiation labs in the Dublin office, whereas there would have been more than that, at least 2. We're also now having a single multi-site accreditation for our laboratories, which again is efficiency, economy of scale, so the water and radiation labs coming together. So in those there's been a number of efficiencies, and also the other aspect, and it was something that was identified by a peer review of Ireland's response to radiological side of things, radiological emergencies, was the RPII itself was based in Dublin and not having a regional presence, whereas we're now using our labs that are across the country to be able to provide emergency response in the case of and be prepared for there was a radiological issue. So staff in the labs are now also are trained to be able to do some of that monitoring as well. So that's providing an additional service at no additional cost to the state.
Thank you. In terms of the Globe project in partnership with An Taisce for the schools, wherever I'm looking now, it's a 2-year pilot programme in 2017. I mean, I know I used to read a lot of your stuff as a child in libraries back in the day. So limited material in Westmeath to read, but and the impact that had, I was kind of the first generation of reduce, reuse, recycle, without divulging my age. But in terms of your practices and what you feed into the schools programme, do you have a comprehensive method of self-auditing in terms of, obviously, it used to be recycle and now it's reduce, reuse, recycle, and things change over time. But also I would have a very serious concern about who gets in at our children's psyche in school. So that's really where I'm going at here. So in terms of the remit and clearance for any ideas you guys might have or An Taisce might have, and they going in to be laid in front of young children in school, while many times it's very good practices and children seem to lead the way in terms of recycling and types of recycling and conservation of water. But what sort of barriers are there, what sort of protections are there for parents who would not naturally have expected that the EPA or definitely An Taisce would have any involvement in their children's education curriculum?
And we've worked with An Taisce and the education unit in An Taisce over the years, and certainly the Green Schools programme is something that I think is well recognised across Europe and beyond as an extremely good programme. With regard to the Globe itself, this is a programme that's been in operation for many years. It's actually NASA in the States and NOAA, which is the as well, have been involved in it. And this isn't about, I suppose, telling children what to do. This is about taking measurements of your natural environment and actually then comparing maybe those measurements with other countries and being able to see, well, what's the difference, for example, in air quality in Ireland versus Germany versus Israel. So it's really developing your scientific skills, but there's a common benchmark of how you go about it. So it's not, as I said, telling them something. This is about bringing children together from kind of 8 to 18 and actually doing citizen science, actually doing measurements. And as I said, air quality is the one we started off with. And just as I suppose the Globe programme, 49 different countries came to Kerry last year in July, all coming together. And as I said, it was certainly for me, it was inspiring to see children from Ghana talking to children from India, talking to children from America about science and the importance of science and also the importance of the natural environment. But to answer your question, and they went out and they did measurements out in Cullinane National Park and looking at the environment there. But to answer your question, it's a very stringent, because that's an international programme, it's very stringent and it's all about science, scientific measurements. So that's what gives us comfort, because I think that's really important in the context of engaging with schools. We're not engaging directly, we're engaging through this internationally recognised programme.
Okay, so I suppose are the Department of Education sort of like the final filter when it comes to what either Globe, be they coming from NASA, I don't really care where they're coming from. Do we have a protection there in place for what is entering the curriculum in school? Because as a parent, I would have considered that that was solely under the remit of the Department of Education and I didn't have to worry about anyone else. And in light of recent reports, I was quite concerned. So I'm just wondering about the protections there in terms of who's the final say on what gets into our schools and is on the curriculum, on our public schools, and gets on the curriculum.
Of course, that's the Department of Education or the ultimate arbiter.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Deputy. And next speaker is Deputy Catherine Murphy.
Yeah, and would you tell me when I'm 5 minutes in?
Yeah.
I want to just divide up two ranges of topics. You're very welcome. Just from your opening statement, you indicated fines and costs totalling 390,000, and that related to inspections of urban wastewater sites, 57 drinking water sites. Would they have been primarily local authority sites?
The prosecutions?
Yeah.
A combination for 2017 of the prosecutions, 25% of them were wastewater, 14% were waste, 7% intensive ag, 25% food and drink. So a combination of all different, but I'd have to say wastewater 25% was for 2017, which is Irish water.
Irish water, okay. Okay, and would that cover the cost of your costs, the 390,000?
With regard to the prosecutions, we got 390,000 euros. The total legal costs you'll see in the agency's accounts were around 440,000, but that's not only for prosecutions, that's other legal advice that we would be getting, for example, on new legislation, etc.
Okay.
So I would say, to answer your question, there's a very high recovery of costs that we incur from prosecutions.
Okay.
We get almost full recovery.
Okay, and what involvement would you have, for example, in unauthorised landfills or unauthorised facilities? Like, I'm thinking of the one in Cardiffstown that cost a fortune to remediate. Where does the EPA come in on something like that, or is that a local authority function primarily?
And it's like everything. It's a little. The Cardiffstown is a little bit complicated, and I'm going to have to be slightly careful because there's an ongoing criminal prosecution there.
Right.
But if I divide it into, there's old and new. There's a lot of legacy sites around the country. In fact, through the waste management plans identified, there's around 500 legacy sites, landfill sites around the country. The EPA's role in that area is primarily around regulation. It's around technical advice and support, and to the local authorities. With regard to the site that you mentioned, with regard to Cardiffstown, that was a legacy site. It was an operation from the 1950s. And in fact, I think by around the 1990s, it had around 2 million tonnes of waste in it. It did come into the EPA then for licensing. So this is one that kind of, I suppose, transferred from the old system to the new. And we licensed that site to bring it into a regulatory regime. It was operated between 2003 and 2010 when it was abandoned. And to be, I suppose, blunt about it, it was a very, very difficult site, and we had numerous complaints, and we took numerous legal actions, including 3 civil actions against the site. And then, as I said, a criminal action through the DPP. That criminal case is ongoing. I believe there's one case in the Supreme Court and one case in the High Court at the moment.
Right, thank you. And just you obviously in your opening statement you talk about the National Waste Prevention Programme. It strikes me that there's something, and that's very good work, and you know, you know, I don't want to be negative about it. So I just want to say that in advance of saying what I'm going to say, because it strikes me that our waste policy is daft. In that we have an incinerator in Ringsend, we have an application for, all of our landfills, our licensed landfills now are in Leinster. I think the one in Galway is if it's not closed, it's about to close. I mean, would you regard that as something that? Or do you have a remit in relation to that? Because essentially you're collecting rubbish in Kerry and you're driving to Dublin or Kildare to dispose of it, or to Carlow. I mean, what role does the EPA have in relation to waste policy, where we can do things about preventing waste, but we ultimately do have to dispose of it somewhere? Where is the remit there?
Okay. It's two separate remits. With regard to waste policy is the responsibility of the department. With regard to where sites go, that's a combination of planning, as you can imagine. The EPA, the local authorities are responsible for waste management and waste management infrastructure in their regions. But they can apply to anybody, can apply to the agency for a licence to operate a facility. So we have that regulatory role and regulatory role over those licensed sites, but we don't determine waste management policy.
Okay, but would you have just as you try and guide attitudes and policy in relation to good practice, would you have an input in relation to good practice? I mean, it's surely not good practice to have rubbish trucks driving all over the country. I mean, surely the EPA will have a role there.
It's mainly a regulatory role,
Right.
I'd have to say.
Okay.
Now, but what I would say is what we've seen, because we report the waste generation, we report the treatment of waste, and that's providing the national statistics in order to support waste policy. So what we're doing, and you can go to our website and you see it all, is saying this is the amount of waste generated, this is where it's been treated, this is what's been landfilled, etc. The other piece on that I would say is when you look at the dependence on landfill, we've gone from a situation of 200 landfills in the 1980s, we're down to 4 licence-lined landfills now. So the local dump has gone, and if you ask what our role is to ensure that the landfills, for example, that are being operated properly.
Okay. Just want to move on to just ask you: have you any contingent liabilities?
No.
And if that was the case, it would be the State Claims Agency that would deal. That would normally be the case. Yeah, thanks very much. I want to deal with the large-scale industrial activities, and we got a report some months ago when we had the department in about Oireachtas in Limerick, and I know that you have. You're a totally independent agency, but you have a responsibility in relation to integrated pollution control licences. I know that we were told in relation to that report that we got that in July 2014 there was work done on getting a financial provision package in place of 28 million to cover, and there's bonds to cover up clean-up and things like that. There's a long-standing issue in relation to, so that's the financial aspect. But in relation to human health, there was an investigation done. It cost somewhere in the region of 5 million. And that's going back some years. Essentially because there was concern over public health. And this is where I'm coming to about a contingent liability and where your remit is. And some samples, some blood samples went missing, for example, and that's an outstanding issue. I have visited the area. I visited in 2016. I was really quite appalled with what I heard from people there, and the burning of skin, the cancers and things like that. Would you have a role, for example, in advising the like of the HSE, or is it the reverse in relation to whether or not it's just financial provision that's required, or is there a health component that you have a role in advising on to avoid liabilities into the future, and to make sure that this licence actually not only covers the clean-up, but and any subsequent if they, for example, cease to trade, that there was sufficient there to deal with that. Where does the health aspect come into that?
A couple of things. With regard to the health, and I might kind of go back and then I'll say with regard to the existing licence, there was this, Oireachtas Luminous was started production in 1983 and it's been licensed by the EPA since 1998 under the EPA Act. There was an investigation. There was an investigation back in the 1990s. In fact, it was in February 1995. There was a multi-agency investigation was concluded. In fact, it commenced prior to the agency being established, and that multi-agency investigation included, was led out by the Department of Agriculture, but it included the Department of Agriculture, Teagasc, the Midwestern Health Board at that stage, as well as the EPA. So it was the health and environment aspects were all covered in it. And ultimately that concluded that there was no evidence that environmental pollution contributed to an increased incidence of animal disease or unusual human health patterns. So I suppose just to be clear, there was that report. Since then, there was also an EU pilot case with regard to this site, and that was also closed. That was opened in 2011 and it was closed in 2014. But to go back to your question with regard to where, how the health environment interlinks, when the EPA licensed the facilities, the HSE is the statutory consultee of the agency, and they give advice to the agency on our licence applications. In addition to that, we do modelling, for example, with regard to air quality against standards, and we then do monitoring when a facility is up and running. So there's a combination there looking at the health. We also have in the agency a health advisory committee, and this is something that we established back in 2011. Although we had very strong engagement with the HSE health boards prior to that, and that advisory committee also gives the agency advice on health, but specifically site by site, the HSE are a consultee and were involved in that multi-site investigation previously as well. So, and then with regard to the financial provision aspect of it, this is something that we get extensive legal and financial expertise, as well as our own technical expertise, to ensure that the monies set aside will cover whatever sums of money are required for the closure of the site.
I mean, the environmental damage would be, it is probably quantifiable, but damage to human health is not quantifiable. So that obviously, would that fall within your remit, or would, if there was a liability, that would probably be HSE liability?
Well, I suppose our role is to ensure that the facility will operate without causing environmental pollution, and environmental is human and environmental health, because they're linked. From your point of view, is that issue closed? From our point of view, we're satisfied that the operation of that facility is within all of the requirements, and that issue is closed. Now, we have to monitor that facility on an ongoing basis to make sure it operates within its licence requirements, and that's absolutely key. But from the multiple investigations that have happened with regard to the site, we certainly are satisfied, based on all of the science, based on all of the evidence in front of us, as well as the other expert parties in those groups. Yeah, I'll be taking this up elsewhere, but because it's one that's you sometimes come across things that really kind of get in on you, and that's just one of them. Can I ask, when you go to visit a facility that's licensed, is it a notified visit, or is it, on spec? It's almost like the school, the kids are coming and everybody being in their good clothes and all that kind of stuff, What is the ratio there? The percentage. We do a combination of both. My understanding is that the vast majority of inspections are unannounced. So that they're not in the good clothes expecting us to come. But the exact percentage I don't have off the top of my head. But certainly the majority are unannounced inspections.
Right. And
I can certainly get you the percentage for the last number of years, if that's of use to you.
I'll take your word for that. The majority are unannounced, and like in relation to in relation to risks. Do you identify in terms of what are the kind of things you see as a risk for example, where there's a licensed facility? I presume that I mean, they're the ones that you have a responsibility for, and it's up to others to notify you if something is not licensed and under planning law, probably unauthorised developments and things like that. But what would you specifically identify as a risk?
Now, just so I'm clear, are you talking about kind of a risk overall, or a risk that has to be included, for example, in a closure remediation aftercare plan, or the risk, kind of the more general risk of the site?
Yeah, I suppose because it's a Public Accounts Committee, I'll be looking at the financial risks primarily. Where, for example, if, for example, something was licensed, you hadn't captured something properly, is that the kind of thing that you would see as a risk?
Okay. Each site has to be treated within their own unique, specific situation, and that's one of the, I suppose, the key premises of the Industrial Emissions Directive, is that it's not just a one-size-fits-all. It's the site and how, the type of site and where it's operating. So the requirement that we have when we're looking at these closure, remediation, aftercare management plans that are submitted from the licensee is we look at those from a technical aspect and, based on our expertise, identify are the appropriate things covered. It'll be different from a transfer station to the likes of a big industrial facility to a pharmaceutical plant. Each are different. We have that technical expertise. We also pull in, as necessary, for example, a mine specialist if we're concerned with regard to a particular type of industry. But we also then pull in, because it's not only about identifying the risk, it's then what would the cost be of addressing that risk, and that's where we'd also pull in financial expertise, and depending on the type of site, we pull in legal expertise as well.
Okay, and I mean, obviously you have a big function in relation to climate change and monitoring where we are, which is, I mean, you can only monitor and advise. Obviously, it's up to government to determine policy, and we have been missing our targets. Do you advise on? I mean, there's an emission trading scheme. I mean, what kind of finance are we talking about into the future in relation to that? What learnings have you got in relation to the monitoring that you have done so far?
Okay, two things. First of all, if you don't mind, I'm just going to confirm to you that 91% of our enforcement visits were unannounced in 2017. I knew I had to figure around 90%, but I can just confirm that. Then, with regard to climate change specifically, and this, we've a number of different roles in the context of climate change, and I'm just on the. One of them, as you say, is the emissions trading scheme, and we're competent authority. Now, it's a European scheme, and we're competent authority to ensure compliance with that scheme. And each of the approximately 100 facilities in Ireland are allowed to emit a particular amount of carbon, and we control that, and they have to report into us. If they emit more, they have to effectively buy allowances, and if they don't buy those allowances, then they are subject to enforcement action, and we've taken enforcement action as necessary. So that's the emissions.
And have you taken enforcement?
Yes.
And on how many?
In last year, 2 facilities were non-compliant, and they then were subject to fines. And one of those fines has been paid. The other fine is the payment plan has been worked out, and they're paying it over the course of a number of months.
Would that be a punitive fine, or would it?
It is punitive, because the whole idea of the emissions trading scheme is you are allowed to do trading, and if you haven't done that trading, if you haven't been compliant, the fine is very high, and it's working. It works at an assumption of a cost of carbon at around €100 a tonne, and that's non-discretionary. The agency doesn't have discretion. It's just if you're non-compliant, this is the amount. So it's set at European level.
Right. And how much was the fine?
One of them was, I think, around €200,000. The other was less. If you give me 1 second,
right.
I can give you the. I can give you both of those. It's around the ETS 207. One is 210,000 and the other was 51,000.
Okay.
So that's on the emissions trading side of things. So it is a stringent regime. On the broader issue of inventories and projections, and again, each country has to provide inventories and projections, and this is about the science and the evidence that can be stood over and investigated. And we have the UN and the EU come and look at how we calculate those inventories, and as well as those projections. And certainly what we've highlighted, it's maybe not dissimilar in ways to the urban wastewater. We've highlighted over a long number of years. We highlighted during recession, and I think one of the quotes that we highlighted during recession when the emissions were going down was that emission-induced reductions were not sustainable, and that as soon as the economy took off again, that emissions would go up, and that we've definitely seen, particularly in areas such as the transport and agriculture. With regard to our role, we certainly give scientific, technical advice, but to government, to other bodies as well. And what we're seeing is emissions are only projected to decrease by 6% by 2020 under what we call the with additional measures, which is all existing policies and additional policies and measures included in the National Development Plan for 2018 to 2027.
And
so
what would they need to have reduced by to get us on target? We know we're going to miss the targets.
Well, I think in 2020 we're going to miss. I cannot see any additional actions that can take place between 2019 and 2020 that is going to get us to comply. Yeah. But we do need to be looking at 2030, and what we're seeing is a 13% reduction under best case scenario, this with additional measures, by 2030, which means that there will be around 7 million tonnes that we will be exceeding our compliance obligations by. So you're talking about 7 million tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent that will need to be made up in that time period. What we would be saying is that you need to look across all sectors and saying, well, where can you make up that 7 million tonnes? Is it in transport? Is it in agriculture? You know, you look at the big hitters. You look at transport and agriculture, they make up around 70% of the non-ETS emissions. So that, therefore, you're going to have to look at those areas. You can also, of course, look at residential, etc. as well. But I suppose that's the key, is the all-government climate plan that's been prepared should be then looking at addressing that gap.
Right, okay.
So, and sorry, the final thing I should say is that we fund, through the Exchequer funding that we get, we fund environmental research, which then also supports, I suppose, looking at, well, what are the potentials? So, for example, potential in carbon sequestration, other potential there as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, at this stage, call Deputy Connolly.
Gurmín Michael agus fáilte tús le ar lehan tasira, so támuid neachú mar aniu. Just thank you very much, and I've read the documentation, and you do a whole range of very important work. In fact, 2 weeks ago we had the Controller and Auditor General's Office and the Central Statistics Office, and you're the third, and I would place you as the trinity of organisations that are most important, actually, to the country in terms of trust and in terms of accountability. So in that, I welcome the accounts, and I think it's the first time ever. Not alone is it a clear audit, but there's no issue, I think, in relation to procurement. In my 3 years, there's always been an issue. So let me, on that positive note, welcome you, and it's very good. But we do need to believe in the Central Statistics Office, in the Controller and Auditor General, and in years we're utterly reliant on you. So in that context, I'm going to ask my questions. Okay. In your opening statement, you talk about a shortage of skills in your work plan for 2019. Not your opening statement, the briefing document.
Yeah.
In the briefing document, what on page 15, and you prepared a workforce plan. You reviewed your existing resources and skill gaps. So you've identified skill gaps. What are they? Okay. Will they be filled? What is the? You know, you've submitted a plan, have you, to government?
Okay. We have submitted back in September a workforce plan to the Department of Communications,
yeah.
And I should say also the Department of Housing, because it is
overlaps.
There is an overlap between the two.
So you've submitted the plan. What have you looked for? Are you able to say that? What are the gaps?
Absolutely. And one of the things, and I suppose when you're going to produce any workforce plan, There can be so many different things you say. You say if we had more resources, of course we could do more.
Just on this. And, just one second. I'm going to come to climate change, and we have the children of the world begging us to do something about it. You know, so we're beyond a dialogue. We're beyond all of that, and I want to come back into that. What is it we need here? So just on that practical question, what have you identified? What are you looking for?
What we've identified is we're looking for 24 staff. Okay. They're mainly for new functions, and the agency has been asked to carry out a number of new functions. For example, water abstraction licensing, regulation of medium combustion plants, review of urban wastewater licences, because although we got temporary staff when the urban wastewater licences were originally issued, those staff were temporary and are now gone. Article 27 and 28 decisions, these are around byproducts and end of waste, particularly important in the context of the construction sector. What happens to waste? Is something a waste or a byproduct? Okay. And also with regard to what we would, I suppose, call a backlog of licences, and that we've 17 staff doing assessments of licence applications across industrial emissions, waste and a variety of other things. And we have more applications coming into us than we can get out the other side of the door, because they are very complex applications. We have to take into consider environmental impact assessment, appropriate assessment, etc. So that's one area, and the other main area is around enforcement, and we're currently engaging with the Department of Communications, looking at how we can better support local authority waste enforcement and drive, I suppose, further rigorous enforcement in waste in Ireland. So they're the two key areas. There's other areas as well, but they're the two biggies.
In relation to climate change?
In relation to climate change, we actually got a number of staff in 2018. So we got staff for the National Dialogue on Climate Action, and that is one function. We also got staff with regard to greenhouse gases and inventories. So in this instance, now, of course, if we had more staff, we could do more, but in this instance, and really prioritising down, that we haven't looked for staff in the climate area, as I said, for 2018, 2019.
Okay. Thanks very much. Now, just in relation to the Department of Communications has given us so much documentation, and it's shocking really the history of our country in relation to now we have in category A landfill sites. I've lost it, 71 or something, I think we have 71. They're just category A, I think it's 71.
Yeah, these are high-risk legacy sites.
So that's what category is.
Yeah.
And they're all over the country. Mm-hmm. Would some of them have got a licence from the EPA, or were they functioning without a licence?
These would be. Now I'm trying to think the best way to explain it, because there's around 500 landfills in totality, and I'll divide them into a couple of different groups so just to explain it to you. There's 285 local authority sites.
285?
And these are sites that operated between 1977 and 1997. It's a legal. It's around the Waste Framework Directive.
That's okay. I'm just conscious of time myself to ask you. Can we through the chair have a note on those, because we'd all be interested in seeing them, and just outline how many, what ones had licences, if they were complying or not complying, because we're being left with a legacy. And I come from Galway, we had a brilliant system. And when I hear about dialogue and when I hear about helping enforcement, we didn't have actual problems. We rolled out recycling way back, 2000, and I've lost track. The response was the government took the power from the local authority. We wanted our own plan in Galway, the city and the county. We wanted to manage it locally, very proactive, and we rolled out. We actually got 70% recycling rates in a pilot project for 6 weeks. And I've said this repeatedly to the point of boredom. The solutions are there. They've been there a long time. So forgive my impatience, not with you, but with the language around the dialogue or encouraging people. People are leading us. People want action, and they want it in Galway, and the official response was terrible. But I'm not asking you to comment on that. So if we just look at Galway, East Galway, and the landfill there, and you took over, or you worked with the County Council with that in an emergency situation, where in East Galway it was Green Star or somebody. Yeah, what's the position now? You're out of it for 2 years, I think.
Okay, I can go through that with you. Just to, I suppose, just to say with regard to landfill, because I think it would be bad not to mention this. With regard to where we've come to in Ireland, I would say, you know, the EPA stats in 2000 we were landfilling approximately 90% of our municipal waste, and that's reduced to 26% in 2018. So there has been significant progress with regard to dependence on landfill and dependence, I suppose, on local dumps as well, you know, unlike landfills. So that's the history, but on East Galway, I sort of agree and don't agree with you, because we were doing it very well in Galway City, and the official response wasn't good in relation to what happened. And it wasn't NIMBYism. We showed that it was possible when all of the engineers and the consultants were telling us it wasn't possible. So, but just in relation to the specific one on East Galway, page 92 of your East Galway landfill. East Galway was licensed. This was an EPA licensed site. It was licensed in July 2004 to accept 100,000 tonnes of municipal waste per annum. The licence was held between 2004 and 2013, and Green Star went into receivership in 2013. And then the Department of the Environment, Galway, and the EPA were the guardians of the site, I suppose, in the interim. I suppose to be really clear with regard to this site, there was financial provision in place. There was money set aside in the accounts with regard to the closure, remediation and aftercare. However, that wasn't honoured by the banks at the time, and the EPA initiated legal proceedings against Green Star Group, the Bank of Ireland and the bank-appointed receiver in order to get the money that had been set aside to be used solely for the purpose of the closure, remediation and aftercare. The High Court, we brought that to the High Court. The High Court ruled against the EPA with regard to, I suppose, question of company versus corporate or environmental law. We then appealed it to the Supreme Court because we weren't satisfied that money set aside for environmental remediation could be, I suppose, removed in the way that it was and not honoured. Ultimately, there was a settlement in which the banks didn't admit liability but paid over a sum of money that could then be used for by Galway County Council for the closure, remediation and aftercare of the site. So that site is now an operation landfill and it's been operated by Galway County Council. As you said, it's looking to close. And I suppose just speaking to that... When is it closing? I think it's June or July, is my understanding. But just to speak to that, there was financial provision in place. Since then, and I suppose we were very disappointed, and as you can see, we took significant legal cases against the banks and the receiver. Since then, the requirements, because of that, have become much more onerous on licensees. And we've led out the development at a European level on what's acceptable for financial provision. We're not alone in Ireland to have had this situation. Other countries, for example, the UK had it. And that's why I suppose there's very onerous requirements now, and the key is to ensure that the monies are sufficient, secure and available, which is why we require, I suppose, very stringent requirements such as bonds for landfills to ensure the money is available and that the state doesn't end up paying for
So is that money ring-fenced now anymore? The money that you're talking about for...
Yes.
It's ring-fenced?
Yes.
Okay. So how is it ring-fenced? Because I'm going to come to Ulgonish now as well and just follow up on what Deputy Murphy...
So, with regard to the scheme itself, as I said, the key for us is that the money's set. First of all, you have to do the technical assessment to identify what is required to be done, as Deputy Murphy has indicated, and then you need to look and to make sure that the costs are appropriate. So that's the costing. So then it's how do you protect the money? From an EPA perspective, as I said, it has to be sufficient, secure and available. We accept a number of different types of financial provision: a secured bond, an on-demand performance bond, a parental company guarantee, a charge on property or environmental impairment liability insurance. However, I should also be clear that we don't accept every type of fund for every type of liability. So for inevitable closure, for example, we wouldn't accept a parental company guarantee or environmental insurance. It has to be a secured fund or an on-demand performance bond or a charge on property. So it's different depending on the liability, it's different.
Okay, so if I just go to Ognish in relation to the figures, and I went through it and I realised that we can't deal with, I want to try and deal with the relevant issues in relation to that. There was a 14 million identified when I looked at the correspondence. So in December 2016, new financial provisions, 14 million was mentioned. Then on the 16th of January, in a letter from me or through the department, 28 million was mentioned. What is the fund that is there and ring-fenced for, I think, what you call CRAMP, is it?
Yeah.
Closure, remediation. What's it?
Aftercare and management.
Yeah, very unfortunate word, CRAMP. But anyway. Yeah, CRAMP. Paralysis, usually.
It is.
Yeah.
It is slightly complicated because it's different aspects of the site. Overall,
okay, well, the simple question is, what is the overall amount of money that's ring-fenced at this point in time?
the overall sum of money is 25 million. Or sorry, actually, the requirement is 25 million. There is actually 28 million euros set aside.
That's the figure I've written down here. Yeah. That's what we were informed. So. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
And I was just going to say how that's split out then is there is a secured fund of 8 million euros and there is a parental company guarantee for the balance.
And just the parental company guarantee, what does that mean if it doesn't comply with the guarantee?
With regard to the parental company guarantee, there is a number of requirements that have to happen in order for us to accept a parental company guarantee. And the financial strength of the parent company is assessed as part of any proposed parental company guarantee.
Okay, so you do various things and there are criteria.
Yeah.
And then, so does it change? Have you a panel of experts that look on, financial experts? Is it updated on a regular basis? Is that, how did it change from, which I welcome that it's gone up, from 14 million to 28 million within the two letters that we received?
And this is why I say it's split. It's actually the overall company guarantee has gone down from 28 to 25 million euros. The 14 million is for a particular part of the site, which is the bauxite residue disposal area.
Yes.
And why, I suppose, the question of why would it go down from 28 to 25 million euros, that's because it's an operational site and remediation of this bauxite residue disposal area, BRDA, is ongoing as it fills up. So money is being spent with regard to remediation as time moves on. And then that's assessed on a regular basis.
So just if it's 14 million in relation to the remediation on site?
Just of this area, this
so is that 14 out of the 28 million?
Exactly, yes.
14 out of the 28, and the rest is a parent guarantee? Parent company guarantee, is it?
14 is for the residue area.
Yeah.
8 million is in a secured fund, and then the balance is in a parental company guarantee. The balance of the 28 million is in a parental company guarantee.
Okay. Now, in relation to that, and I'm going to use it as an example, is there independent monitoring of that? Do you monitor it? Do you get somebody else to monitor it? You talked about modelling. Does somebody go out and inspect unannounced on a regular basis, or what happens?
With regard to, first of all, with regard to inspections of the site, there were 8 inspections of the site in 2018. And again, as I said, that would be 91% of the inspections are unannounced. So, yes, we go out to the site, we inspect the site.
So how many inspections generally took place in 2018?
Over 1,500.
1,500?
In the totality for industrial facilities.
That's right.
For 2018, for Oireachtas specifically, there were 9.
9. Yeah. And they were unannounced inspections?
Unannounced. Now, I said 91% of our inspections are unannounced. So how many of those?
Okay. And you've already given details to my colleague here, Deputy Murphy, in relation to that. I'm going to park that for the moment, other than to say, when you refer to a thorough investigation, I can't judge that because I'm coming late to it, but I've read. But certainly I have serious concerns about the loss of samples that were given, a repeated loss of samples at the time. So I'm not sure we can look back and say, but I just leave it at that. Certainly the loss of samples are, when I looked at it and I took some time and I did some research on it, there are serious concerns in relation to how that investigation was handled. But that's for another day, perhaps outside of here. So
could I just respond? Because I think we're comparing apples with oranges here a little bit. There was a multi-agency investigation in the 1990s, as said, and the agency was part of that. What I'm talking about here are the EPA regulation of a licensed facility, what we require with regard to closure remediation, aftercare plans, and how we monitor the site. It's just to keep those two.
Oh no, I understand that. Absolutely, I appreciate that. You've gone through that and you've set it out for me. But it's just in the context of what Deputy Murphy raised, and your response was there was a thorough multi-agency investigation and the conclusions. I couldn't hold with that, but that's for another day outside of here. Certainly what I've read, and because of the samples going missing, amongst many other things. So I just parked that one. Just in relation to buffer zones and sewage treatment plants and radon. Radon. So just, I noticed, and again, I don't wish to be parochial, but it came up in terms of a treatment plant in Spiddle, and it has a general application in relation to guidelines from the EPA in relation to buffer zones near wastewater treatment plants. And I think the inspector in his report from Burke, again, I'm not expecting you to comment on an individual case, but he acknowledged that the guidelines from the EPA are dated. They're old. I think they're 1990 or 1999. It must be acknowledged that the guidance document is 20 years old and does not deal with larger wastewater treatment plants. This was just in the context of one treatment plant where the residents wanted a larger buffer zone from the wastewater treatment plant. They cited the EPA guidelines. The inspector, in recommending permission, cited them. And just that I'm quoting from it. It has to be acknowledged they're 20 years old. In view of the changes in everything, scientific evidence, technology, do you plan to update those guidelines?
I would have to know, because you're quoting a Burke inspector's report. I'm just my colleague, but maybe, Chair, something you could say about the guidelines, because that's.
Let me take you away from Burke and I just quote the guidelines. Table 4 of the EPA's wastewater treatment manual on treatment systems for small communities. So it's a general issue I'm asking you now, not a those guidelines are 1999 for small communities, business, leisure centres and hotels. So we're building a water treatment plant near those facilities. We're looking at guidelines from 1999. Question, are you planning to update them? Are you satisfied that they're adequate?
Yeah, I'm not aware there's plans to update them, but actually I was involved in drafting those guidelines. They emerged actually from a research project that was managed by the Civil Engineering Department, actually from INUI Galway. But I think they were to do with small communities.
That's right. Yeah.
And don't hold me to this, but I think
population in excess of 161.
Yeah, I think the guidance says minimum distances, because I remember during the consultation process there was a desire to set at least some kind of criteria. And said, don't hold me to it, but I think the word minimum is there. What I would say though is that things have moved on an awful lot in terms of the area dispersion modelling is, and whether we were to change the guidance or not, a modern approach now to odour was you can do dispersion modelling, so you can actually do it much better than, let's say, an arbitrary figure, because you can quantify the amount of odour that can generate from a wastewater treatment plant, and you can model it in all different directions. So I think a better approach at this stage would be to model the activity as opposed to maybe putting a kind of a set number to it. It would be far better.
Yeah, that's interesting, but. And I'm open to that. I'm not an expert. I'm listening to it. I live beside a sewage treatment plant. I'm very familiar with odours and smells. But in any event, just perhaps you can look at that. That's the document that residents have to quote from. That's the document they're looking at, and they're saying 1999 and things. So,
No, absolutely. I think we're more than happy to look at that.
The radon, finally, the radon.
Yeah.
And again, from your briefing report. Page 13 of your briefing report, page 11 and 12. 13. Around 300 cases of lung cancer in Ireland every year are linked to the radioactive gas radon. That's your own research completed in 2018. Accumulation of radon in our homes is the second leading cause of lung cancer after smoking. And around 500 people are living in homes with radon concentrations above the acceptable level. And I understand the uptake on the radon remediation, again, my own house has been affected, the uptake is not great. Maybe that's the wrong way to put it. Not enough people are taking up the assistance offered in relation to radon. Would you just comment for me on that paragraph? It's a very serious paragraph.
It is, and it's an extremely serious issue, and certainly the EPA, and before the EPA, the RPII, the Radiological Protection Institute, for many years really highlighted that it is a big concern that people may not be aware of, and has spent many years in highlighting the issue of radon, which we then took on the merger between the EPA and the RPII, and we have active campaigns to go out and highlight the issue to people. There is a national radon control strategy, which is an all-of-government strategy. It's just come to the end of its first phase, and I know the next phase has been developed, looking at what are the actions that can be taken, because some of the actions, as you say, are around going out to individual houses and doing measurements. Well, first of all, it's identifying the areas most vulnerable, then it's promoting in those areas.
That all has been done, hasn't it? The identification has been done. We know in Galway, we've seen the maps, we've seen the red spots and the high spots. So the question is, what's happening in relation to the steps? What are your recommendations? Is it your responsibility? Is it the local authority?
Well, I suppose, first of all, to say the maps, it's back to science and evidence. You still need to be updating those, and that's one thing that we're doing. The National Radon Control Strategy identifies roles for a number of different bodies. What are we doing? First of all, it was, for example, things like in conveyancing, to ensure that radon is part of a conveyancing if you're moving house, so that you can confirm that a radon survey has been done. It's also one of the specific actions we did as a pilot project last year was to look at offering grants for people to support them if you've got, first of all, to do you do the measurement in your area, but what we'd identified is even people who had identified high levels of radon in their home, getting them to actually then translate that into action and do the work wasn't as high as we'd like. So we then did a pilot project offering not only the testing, but then also grants for remediation. And we're now assessing the results of that to see if there are any learnings to, I suppose, to push people further. Also looking at actions, trying, I suppose, particularly around guidance for builders, requirements for new builds as well. So there's actions by different parties, EPA being one of them, but I suppose our role is to pull it all together and to be pushing and promoting all of those various actions.
Okay, thank you. Just how is it diagnosed? Where does the diagnosis, you know, you go in with lung cancer? I don't mean to go down the medical, just out of interest when I see, it's a phenomenal figure. 300 cases of lung cancer are linked to the radioactive gas. Is that diagnosis made? How did you become aware of that figure?
Well, I'm going to turn to Tom Ryan, who worked with the Radiological Protection Institute for many years, so he's the expert in this area.
Thank you, Deputy. It's an estimate based on the average concentration in people's houses around the country, and based on the research and surveys that we've done over the years, and based on models that have been developed internationally. So it is an estimate. It wouldn't be generally possible to identify a particular cancer that was induced from radon, but it is an estimate.
It's an estimate based on scientific fact. If this is the level, then this is the correlation with lung cancer. Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. Deputy Connolly, to come back in briefly.
Just following on for the questions on the Green Star receivers issue, and you went to the Supreme Court and you got a sum of money. So I imagine the company went bust, then obviously everyone wanted a few pounds and you had a few pounds due to you, and you went to the Supreme Court. How much did it cost you in total, the court proceedings?
couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but we can get that information.
I think it's
for you.
very important, because if you chased up to the Supreme Court to get less than a cost,
Oh, well, it certainly wasn't less than the cost. We can get the details for you. What I
think it's important that we get those figures here.
And just to say, I suppose I should also be really clear, we went to the Supreme Court, but ultimately there was a settlement before the Supreme Court hearing. So that's what it was.
But still, up to the High Court, there would have been significant costs. And then I think back to, you know, the secure bonds and the parent company. If the parent company is an unlimited company, how would you know if the parent company is good for the money, or if there's any sort of external issues that wouldn't let you have vision into their accounts? So how do you deal with companies like that?
With regard to it, and we get extensive legal advice, is the first element of it. It's only acceptable where the parent company is of sufficient financial strength to guarantee, and that there's no risk to the EPA legally enforcing the guarantee where the parent company and its assets are based. It's not acceptable, as I said, in case of inevitable disclosures, and what we, in assessing and agreeing the monitoring of a parental company guarantee, first of all, there is a financial assessment of the parent company guarantee, its relationship with the operator, and a review of the corporate structure and audited accounts. There needs to be demonstration that there is no legal obstacle preventing the parent company from entering into the guarantee or preventing the EPA from enforcing the guarantee. So that's a review of the corporate constitutional documents and approvals. We then look at the execution of the guarantee and ongoing demonstration of the financial strength of the parent company, including submission of financial and management accounts. So we've got extensive legal input into, is this a suitable company to have a parental company guarantee?
And why wouldn't you just get a sum of money and hold it? I can't understand why you'd have to go through, why don't you, like the local authorities used to keep a bond? It's called a bond as well, wasn't it? A bond as well. A surety. Why don't you do that? Why don't you? Many of these companies are huge companies, and they generally are generating big enough profits. Why don't you just hold the money as sort of like a guarantee that you'd hold on their behalf?
Well,
to make sure.
The key for us is that whatever instrument is used, is that it can be drawn down. And for some companies, as you say, they're huge companies, and what they are able to guarantee to us that money will be available, and that's the key. So whether it's a bond or a parental company guarantee, we get legal advice and we say, okay, the key, rather than saying this tool we'll accept or this tool we won't, is the tool going to be able to deliver? And so that's from our perspective. And it can work from both. We're not then managing money in a bank, so that is, because that also has its own risks, liabilities, etc. as well. So different tools can work, and that's why we try to give flexibility as long as they deliver on their purpose.
In terms of the radon, so since people become more aware of radon and the barriers being put in, the monitors put in, the maps with the high levels of radon, have you done an audit of the impacts on, is there any, I suppose, positive impacts? So we say 300 arbitrary figure of lung cancer cases. Have we a figure before you did anything about radon? So do we know, is there any tangible impact on lung cancer rates from the barriers and the changes to the way we build houses and that? Is it working?
There has been, I suppose, there's been research. There's been research also about why there isn't uptake, and there has been assessment with regard to the radon control strategy, what's worked, what hasn't worked, but then also some of the scientific information evolves as time moves on as well. So yes, we've done reviews of both the radon control strategy in itself, and as I said, where where we're at with regard to, also remember it's percentage of population, as Tom has identified. As the population goes up, that can have an impact as well.
That just can be factored in with a sum. I mean, that's...
But so when you're saying an arbitrary, we end up saying an arbitrary number of 300. 300 out of a population of 4 million versus 3 million out of a population of 5 million means there's less people by its very nature. So we have done that work. And I said, but the big thing that we keep coming back to is uptake by people, and how do you get that uptake?
Yeah, but what I'm getting back to is maybe people aren't as enthusiastic about taking up either the way you fix your radon levels, or that if they're not actually seeing raw data that goes. It doesn't really matter if the population is 10 or 15 people and it's 1 or 2. Like, that's just a proportion. So what I'm trying to get to is the science-led initiatives to reduce radon and in turn reduce instances of lung cancer. Have we any data to show that anything you have done has actually reduced the rates of lung cancer?
Absolutely, and again, just because Tom has many more years' experience than I have on this.
Well, that's the whole objective of the National Radon Strategy, is to improve the situation. What we do know, and what's amply demonstrable, is that with barriers, with remediation measures in houses, you can get very significant reductions in radon exposure, and therefore the estimate to your health goes down. So we know that if you have a house with a high level and you intervene by putting in a sump, or if you're building a new house, you can reduce the potential exposure by having a radon barrier installed. We know that to a scientific fact that these measures work.
I know that, but are they having any real impact on population health? I know how they work, and I know that they're scientifically proven to stop radiation getting through them. But in terms of the overall impact on population health, do we have any figure to show anything that's been done? What I'm getting at is, if you're trying to get people to make changes to their homes to improve their health, well, you kind of have to show them that other people made these changes and it had a net positive outcome.
Yeah, and that's the message that we try to get across to the individual householder.
Yeah, but surely the best way of getting across a message is to say 200 lives have been saved or something.
Well, I suppose that's what I'm saying, Deputy, is that the whole strategy is around trying to improve the situation, and we're trying to create awareness around it. But the uptake is so small at this stage that it's not having the impact. And
that's my point.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd have a better uptake if you gave people very clear data as to why they needed to do something.
Well, we're able to do that at an individual level, what we can do in houses. So we're trying to address the situation nationally then through the strategy. And things are interdependent. If you get the high uptake, you'll be able to demonstrate it at a national level. We can demonstrate improvements.
How long are you at this? How long is the radon going on? Is it 20 years? Is it about 20 years?
I have to say, Deputy, it's not a problem that we're on our own in Ireland. It's something that we share with colleagues across Europe,
I know
trying
this.
to get action on this.
If we're spending money on measuring and mapping, and we're recommending things that people do to prevent exposure, surely we need to show them that there is a net gain from the spend, that so many lives have been saved, or so many outcomes have been better as a result of these initiatives. Surely that's, you put in money, state money, and you expect to get something out at the other end.
And I think certainly what we can send in to yourselves is there has been reviews of the work on the radon, what's worked. I suppose to answer your question, the state's invested money. It is a combination of what's worked at a house level, but then also what's worked at a policy level. And I think that's critical, because some of it's about getting individuals to do actions, but actually if there's a policy around building of houses and what happens, that saves trying then to do things on a house by house. So what we can do, I think, would be useful is to send into the committee just information on the radon control strategy, what's worked, etc.
Okay.
In terms of the air quality, just something there in the documents, ambition is to significantly increase the availability of of local real-time air quality. What sort of monitoring have we at the minute throughout the country? So just let's say there's a radiological incident in Portlaoise, for the sake of anywhere. You know, how quickly, what way are you on monitoring? How quickly can you say there's such and such wind blowing in a certain direction? Where are you on local air quality monitoring at the minute?
There's two separate things there, so I just want to make sure I'm answering the question one. First of all is the ambient air quality monitoring programme, which is primarily about things like particulates, all those sort of things, which have significant human health impacts, which is why we've got air quality standards. The second piece, which I can also address, is the National Radiological Measurement Network, which is a separate network. So there's two different
just
networks.
deal with the particulates first.
Yeah.
So where are we in terms of, so let's say if Road Power Station went on fire, that would have a particulate thrown out into the air. Have you, how many monitors are there around the country? How close are they together? What's the plan?
The Ambient Air Quality Monitoring Network is a national network, and what that does is looking at compliance with air quality directives at a EU level. And at the moment, or at the start of 2017, there were 29 different monitors, 19 of which were real-time. And that's around compliance with EU requirements, and we're fully compliant with Ireland with regard to the amount of monitoring. However, while we're in compliance with EU standards, a number of the monitoring stations' air quality failed to meet the WHO guidelines. So it's not a standard, it's a guideline, it's a recommendation from the WHO, including for fine particulates. And this is something we've raised in our air quality reports. We've also called for, but it's a broader thing, I think, at European level, is compliance with the WHO guidelines as a standard rather than the EU standards as such at the moment. What we're looking to do is to move from 29 stations up to 81 stations across the country, so more than doubling all of the air quality stations. We've got agreement with the Department of Communications for that. That's going to cost around €5 million. So there's a monitoring piece of that, but then there's also, to answer your question, there's a modelling and forecasting capability as part of this programme, which we're rolling out, and we're engaging with the likes of Met Éireann with regard to that. And then there's also encouraging a greater understanding and involvement of the public in air quality through citizen science, etc. So it's a combination of initiatives. But to answer your question, we're moving from 29 up to 81. With regard to if there's a particular issue at a site, on occasion, on a number of occasions, say for example a fire, as you can imagine, there isn't necessarily going to be an air quality monitoring station just beside it. We have portable stations that can be brought and are brought to monitor the air quality in those situations as well.
And in terms of the GMO foods and Brexit and all of that, so part of your remit is monitoring. That's genetically modified, I assume, is it? Have you had any sort of getting Brexit ready in terms of protecting our food chain and the integrity of it? Is that part of your job? I'm thinking, you know, the risk of hormone beef entering our system and, a bit like the antibiotics, subsequently being excreted into the water table or wherever. So what sort of role have you had, or any role, in terms of preparing for Brexit and the protection of our food supply chain?
With regard to GMOs, that's not our role. I suppose, to be really, really clear, it's the role of with regard to the transport and checking materials as it comes into ports, etc. That's the role of the Department of Agriculture. With regard to our role, we have a regulatory role, which is looking at contained use of GMOs, including in medicine, and for deliberate release. And that's, as I said, a very specific regulatory role with regard to potential environmental impact. But, as I said, to answer your question with regard to monitoring of materials coming into the state, no, that's not our role. On occasion, when there has been potentially an issue, we've engaged with the Department of Agriculture and given our scientific expertise and input into that at that stage. So that's with regard to Brexit, no. On the broader Brexit question...
So in terms of your work with the Department, have you a sort of an action plan or whatever ready? So if there is a very hard Brexit situation emerges eventually, and if there's a risk of product entering the market, have you done some sort of work on if a container somehow ends up getting into the Republic of Ireland? Have you an action plan as to how to deal with the where that product is gone and how you remove it from the system?
That's absolutely the role of the Department of Agriculture.
Okay, thank you. And something else I want to ask you about. Oh yeah, the rainwater. Somehow I ended up sitting on that Water Charges Committee. The rainwater in Ireland, especially the cities, is running into the sewage system. Is there any plans, and my understanding is that this is obviously, you're dealing with a far greater amount of wastewater that's not technically actually fully waste. Is there any plans for dealing with this long term in terms of, obviously runoff water wouldn't need as much treatment as sewage, of separating not the feeds, the exit of,
Yeah, separate types of drainage.
Yeah, dual drainage.
That will need to be looked at. That will need to be looked at by Irish Water. What I would say at the moment is there's some maybe more fundamental issues that need to be addressed in the short term, but absolutely. And again, it's something across Europe. Is an issue of all of the water entering into kind of one drain and then having to be treated. But as I said, I suppose for us there's some more broader issues about wastewater not being treated at all and raw sewage being discharged that should be addressed in the first instance.
And just to follow up on the radon, if in terms of the response you get back to us here, what I'd like to see, and perhaps other members might have something to say on it, just in the body of the answer, if we could have how long this is in situ, the radon guidelines, how much has been spent on it in terms of your department and cross-departmental and any external consultancy, and administration in terms of getting the message down to people on the ground, uptake and the uptake since the genesis of it to now, perhaps a graph showing up and down uptake, and if there is any data on instances of lung cancers, in particular red areas, if we could see if there's any. I'm really interested to see, have we got any bang for our buck here in terms of overall positive health benefits, for leaving parking the well-proven lab testing of such methods. I'm talking about practical testing on the ground. And also just to follow up on the urban water illicit or otherwise drug content.
Yeah.
I just think it's very important, considering it's a problem in other European countries, and I just think it needs to be monitored. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll get that information into
the you can forward that. Deputy Murphy, want to come in briefly? Thank you, Deputy.
Obviously, the corporate culture of the companies that you're looking at will be important in terms of determining, what kind of a bond you'll require. And there's one in my own area that you could be absolutely sure that they will do everything absolutely by the book. And in fact, if there's a criticism, you often hear it's that they go over the top, but which I much prefer. But in relation to the like of a changing environment. For example, if you look at Oireachtas, and they're very important jobs, and I know we've got to consider that aspect as well, in an area that there aren't plentiful jobs. But the changing environment there, for example, would be the US embargo. And would you review, the bond situation and require a different kind of bond if there is a risk to the parent company in a way that there potentially was there and still could be in the future?
And that's one of the things that we did do in the context of the recent situations you talked about, specifically with regard to the US Treasury sanctions. We consulted with our financial advisors, and it was determined at that stage that the financial provision we had in place was satisfactory and there wasn't risk. But where circumstances change, absolutely, of course, you need to look and say, are the criteria on which we base the decision still valid?
Okay.
So yes is the answer.
Thank you. Just in relation to bonds, I mean, from my experience at local authority level over a long number of years, the crash, there was a huge number of the only bonds that were actually provided that were provided in perpetuity at construction, the construction industry level, were Anglo-Irish bonds. Every other kind of bonds had a duration of maybe 7 years. Were there any Anglo-Irish bonds, and are the bonds in perpetuity that you would be getting?
Now, Anglo, no is my understanding, the first thing to say, and I'm just looking here, sorry. Yeah, sorry, they're annually 3 or 5 years, so they're not in perpetuity. We do include in the bond template a clause whereby we may make a demand if the bond is not renewed or replaced prior to expiry.
Yeah, I was going to say
so
that prior.
Yeah, it has to. It has to be prior.
Yeah.
And the one thing I'd say is, just because you were talking about financial or parental company guarantee bonds, etc., around 36% of our total financial provision that's been agreed, so around €267 million, is bonds.
Right, okay.
So that's kind of, I suppose, it's by far the highest of the financial provisions agreed.
And if there are cash bonds or insurance bonds, I presume there aren't cash bonds.
It is provided by the financial institution themselves. So.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Can I ask you about, you talked about conveyancing in relation to radon. Is that actually part of the conveyancing process?
It is now. No, it's an optional question rather than a mandatory, but it is included.
So that's something that really ideally should be mandatory?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. In relation to grants, there certainly were grants. Are there still grants for remediation in relation to radon?
There's kind of, I suppose, there's a number of there was a broader kind of grant available for houseworks that this could fall into, but very specifically the pilot project we were looking to do last year was on. I think it was around 50% grant now. I just need to, again, I can send this information as part of the overall radon, was looking at specific grant for this types of work.
Okay.
And that's been considered, there was legislation at one stage that was looking to enact grants specifically with regard to radon. My understanding that was delayed for a variety of reasons, so this was why we wanted to do the pilot project, to see if that was enacted, how do you support the delivery? How do you get the outcomes that we need? Okay,
and because there is a financial issue here, if we can reduce people getting cancer, it's in the round that needs to be looked at.
And it's not expensive with regard to householders, and this was one of the things that I suppose, I shouldn't say it's not expensive. Of course it's expensive for any householder, but in the broad scheme of a cost of a house, definitely when you're starting to build, to put the sump in the first instance, but even retrofitting, I think people sometimes could be concerned at tens of thousands of euros. It's not, it's around just over €1,000 in most instances, which is a lot of money, I absolutely accept, but it's very doable for a very good result.
Right, and I know that you mapped the areas that were most, and you could see on the map that there were areas of the country that were more at risk, but it's not exclusive to that. In my own area is not one of the high risk areas, but I've certainly come across people where there is high radon levels in individual houses. So, and I think it's easy enough to test for. But
it is, and it's a low cost. The testing is available. It's just putting a monitor in your house for a month or two. I think all of the EPA, we're glad to know we've got our houses tested, and it's a very easy, and it gives you that. It gives you an assurance.
Right. Okay. And just finally,
well, most people it gives an assurance, because it is at least comforting to know, even if you're in an area that's deemed low, that you still,
I'd want to know if it was high myself.
Exactly.
So,
and there is a radon monitor down below. My colleagues are pointing, so you're
on, and Mr. Leary, you're pointing to something there I can't see.
I think it's the monitor. I think that's the radon monitor.
Where?
Just underneath. That's just underneath.
We've one in the room. Are we safe? Can you read it?
I haven't given you the results yet.
Is it not online? Is it not on your iPhone there, the result?
No. Maybe we should spend less time in the committee rooms. Could be
and
dangerous.
as I suppose jokingly said, we've seen it in workplaces as well, that certainly in a number of workplaces where radon has been tested, it has been found to be high. And when you think about the amount of time we spend in a workplace, so then remediation was needed as well. So it's not only, I suppose sometimes we think about the house, but it's actually where we spend our time.
And just very finally, you did some public opinion testing, and in your briefing note, you said more than a third of adults, 37%, recognise climate change as the most pressing issue facing the country, while 61%, it's been in the top 3 concerns. So it's just right up there. There's a public understanding. Does that kind of public awareness actually make you focus slightly differently on where you put your resources, or is that just about testing the concerns people have, so as that you can actually assist in the knowledge that you can provide people in terms of their own impact and what they can do?
I suppose what it does, and maybe this in a way links back to the radon, by going out and finding out from people, you can find out, is the communication that you've been using working? Was also among many other providers of information on climate change. So first of all, you're testing, are those messages getting through? But also for us, we also then drill down that further and look at the different age groups and what are different age groups responding, where they find their sources of information. Is it the television? Is it social media, etc.? And that then helps us in the context of our communications on climate and other environmental issues. So where should we be back to investing? Where should we be spending money in getting environmental issues, awareness levels raised, etc.?
Okay, right. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Deputy Connolly. And then I'll have a few last questions.
Just a few practical questions, but just first, I don't think they're comparable. I think the radon and climate change are not comparable. No, I'm not. I think people have spoken in relation to climate change. What we need is action. So, in relation to radon, as somebody who was there on the council, and I won't go into person, but there was a good awareness campaign in the sense we got quarterly reports on housing, and you'd get updates on the radon. That slipped by the way. So I think it comes back to. I look forward to what you're going to send to us. These programmes have to be monitored, they have to be led, there has to be leadership from the local authority and has to be pushed, and then they must be reviewed by a higher body. Climate change is utterly different, and I don't know how, I want to just climate change. Okay.
And I suppose I should be clear, I didn't mean to kind of be putting them in comparable, but it's more that it's how you get. Are you being successful in communication? Your messages was, I suppose.
I might come back to that because I see over a couple of million on communications in a minute. I think the message from people of Ireland and from the children is do something about climate change. We don't need any more dialogue or communication. But certainly I don't think so. But in relation to just my questions, again, I think it was your opening statement or the briefing document, you have a list, a national priority site list that you update on a regular basis. And that one is available for July and December. I downloaded it just to look at it. And the counties and various. That's a new initiative by ye, is it? And when will that one be updated? When will the next? You update it every quarter, but it's not available every quarter, is it?
Oh, it is. And in fact, I'm looking to my Director of Enforcement beside me, and who's saying that the next one is literally, if it's not published today, it'll be today or tomorrow. So it is updated.
Because I looked and it wasn't there. That's and is that a new initiative in the last number of years? Or?
It is, and it's a new initiative in the context of kind of, I suppose, overall compliance and assurance for the regulated industry. And I suppose it's also to highlight that only a small number of the close on 800 facilities that we regulate cause significant problems.
Okay, so there's 800 facilities. That includes landfill, that includes organish, that includes industrial, everything.
What it doesn't include is the wastewater, because you're including another 1,000
that's
there.
So we have 800 facilities, and then on this list there are 8.
Yeah.
Will we call them 8 offenders or 8 people who are not compliant? 8 non-compliant?
well,
entities?
A significant non-compliant, because just because you're not on the priority side list doesn't mean you've no non-compliances against you.
Well, that's what I want you to try now and clarify for me. How do you end up on this list? So,
yeah. There's specific criteria with regard to the national priority site list, and I'm just going to, where the old eyesight is going, priority site, and I can just give you the kind of the broad headings. 7. So the criteria include, and I'm looking to my colleague here, it's around enforcement history. So it's around complaints, incidents, compliance investigations, where we're going in and we're looking and saying, are there issues around your compliance?
Just let me simplify this for me. There's 8 on a national priority list. Will I take it that they're all non-compliant with the licence that you've given and the conditions attached?
There will be a combination of activity, a combination of issues. There will be, when I say our compliance investigations open, we are actively considering things such as prosecution for non-compliance against our licence. You will also find that, I think, you talk about those 8 sites, around 46% of complaints will come from those small number of sites. So it's sites that are being very much complained about, and also we're looking and saying, are there compliance issues here that need to be escalated?
So when you say you consider taking enforcement action, why wouldn't you take enforcement action if they're non-compliant? It's a rigorous process given of the licence, and you need 17 more people, you've said already, in relation to applications for licences. You haven't. So it's a rigorous process, takes a lot of time. If there's non-compliance, why aren't you taking action?
We are. I suppose there'll be 29 prosecutions in 2018.
But they go on a list first and they get a time. Do they get...
It's not that straightforward. In some instances, if there's an incident, for example, we may go straight to prosecution, and you may end up on the priority site list after that. It depends on the non-compliance, it depends on the severity of it, it depends on, is it a non-compliance for sending in your report late, or is it a non-compliance for discharging.
So you assess the seriousness of the non-compliance. But are you reliant on complaints if 46%?
No. We're absolutely not. I think complaints from members of the public are extremely important, because it's how are these companies being a good neighbour. We are absolutely not reliant on complaints.
So you're reliant on your proactive inspection policy.
Exactly.
And are you happy that your proactive inspection policy is up to par? You have enough people doing it to assure ye that the 800 entities with a licence are compliant?
Yes.
You are?
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then just in relation to communications, I started out congratulating you, and I still do, but on page 87, communications, administration costs, and there's over $1 million on communications.
Yes.
Why do you need to spend $1 million on communications? You produce good reports, you produce facts and figures, they speak for themselves.
If only that was the case, and I think in a way you can produce the science, but a big part of our work is communicating the science. So it's not just producing the science, it's how do you translate that science into information that's relevant for people and that supports people taking action.
Under the communications and the $1 million, who is getting that?
So,
is that private entities?
Around half of that is sponsorship, and in the context of sponsorship that includes EcoEye, the environmental programme, that's around €255,000, an awful lot of money, but that programme gets around 300,000 viewers. So if you're looking at the viewership on environmental messages, for us, again, bang for buck, that's very high. We've also funded to a much lower extent under sponsorship, around 37k, the Grow, Cook, Eat programme that you might have seen on RTE, which is looking at, I suppose, food, health, environment nexus. So those would be the type of things. We also have exhibitions and fund the Young Scientist exhibition. So we're there every year. We're engaging with teenagers, kids.
So they're not going to PR companies?
No.
So perhaps again through the chair we could get a list.
Yeah.
The breakdown of that sponsorship and the different programmes.
So when
maybe there was communications, I saw on them.
Yeah. So when I see communications, I don't see PR companies.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Now, we do, we have on the PR, it does include €80,000 for PR. Well, it's under PR, it's Car Communications that we do have a contract with. They provide a media monitoring service for us, and they also assist some of our staff. If you're going out to launch, for example, the State of the Environment report, they sit down with the media people and say, okay, well, how do you translate from, we are a very scientific organisation with lots of scientists, engineers, how do you translate that message into something that's understandable for people?
What has gone to that company, 80,000?
80,000 euros.
Are there any other companies?
The other company is a company called Walsh PR, which is specifically about a section on our website called Live Green. And that's work that we're doing in conjunction with a number of other bodies in trying to support, I suppose, people making the right decisions in their home with regard to waste, the reduce, reuse, recycle, etc. And that's promoting that site in particular, and that was for that particular year.
So that's finished?
Yes.
So the car one is being renewed?
Yes.
Yeah. I'd have serious concerns about the use of money in relation to PR companies, but that's your decision and you've clarified it. But I certainly think your work should speak for itself.
And would Yellowstone, who designed your annual report, be included in that PR figure as well?
That's included, will be included in the overall communications costs, print.
You can send us the breakdown.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we have it all.
That's two matters. The website that you've updated, I think it was 60,000 or 70,000. Was that the figure?
Yeah.
An bhfuil Gaeilge an sin? Is it bilingual?
Parts of it are bilingual, but we are in the midst. Like what I should say is that 60k was for doing a complete review of the website, and we're now updating the website. I would say we have an Irish language plan as required by Commissioner Changa. Not everything that we produce we do in both languages. I will be clear and say that, but we do have extensive Irish included, and we also have extensive Irish speakers within the organisation that then go on to the various...
Is the website bilingual?
I said elements of it. I can't...
Have you a name or a cusport to make it bilingual?
Not all. Like we will not put every element of the work on the website bilingually. Okay. We have particular reports and aspects of the web that will be bilingual, but we also have to look at the costs of doing it completely bilingual. So I said we have a plan, an Irish language plan, in consultation with Commissioner Changa. And we will be continuing planning to follow that with regard to what we publish in Irish.
But for those people who want to do their business in Irish, how do they do that if it's not bilingual?
Well, it's back to not every report.
I understand that. Yeah. I understand that, and one has to be sort of reasonable. But at the very least, the website should be bilingual.
Well, if you look at our website and the sheer volume of material on it, that's the key.
Okay, so you've been in contact with the Commissioner.
Oh yeah, we have. That's why I said we have a plan.
I leave that out. The last point was just the remediation, and I found it, and it was 71. Now, 71 historic landfill remediation sites. That's just in category A.
Yes.
And that's outside of then silver mines, Avoca, and all of the other former mining sites. They're landfill sites. I mean, it really is a picture of Ireland and what we've done. So we come back to compliance and regulation. At the end of the day, it costs us a lot more.
Well, that's
that's my. It costs a lot more. Therefore, Ogonish in the same. It costs more in the end. It's better to do it right the first time. And so if we're going to give licences to industries, we have to see that they comply. We're picking up the pieces. I've lost count of the money for the remediation. So my specific question is, what role have ye in relation to the remediation, these old sites that are being remediated, and there are plans, and it's difficult to keep up. And I have to say the department has been very good in giving the information. But where they're at, and then there's a delay, and then the money is not spent, Where are we in relation to those sites? We've one in Galway. It's not on that Category A site. We've one in Galway, the former dump. There was a time where the city manager was about to go to prison for contempt of court. In fairness to him, he inherited it. But that's how bad the situation was in the site in Galway. So, my question, where are ye in relation to these historic sites? What role do you have? And are ye part of the delay?
No, was the,
No,
the short answer was
Right.
part of the delay.
Yeah.
With regard to the historic sites, I suppose this, absolutely, this highlights why things should be done right. And I suppose what I would also be saying is you look at the transformational change in the waste sector, in the waste management sector, between the 90s and now.
What role have ye in these 71 sites?
So I just want to highlight, and that with regard to EPA role, EPA regulation of landfills, etc., has made a transformational change. With regard to these historic sites, it is for the local authorities, as you know, through their waste management plans, are responsible for infrastructure and waste facilities. Our role is regulation, because a number of these sites, 285 of those sites, need to come into the EPA for authorisation as historic landfills. These are the ones that operated between 1977 and 1997, so that's a regulation role. We also have a role in providing technical support and guidance, and we've issued codes of practice, for example, to local authorities to support them in their work of assessing these landfills. And the other aspect that we have, is and it's pulled together there with regard to the number of sites, is we have a role in providing what's called a Section 22 register, which is where the local authorities put all of the information and log all of the information with regard to the historic sites, and that information then is included in the waste management plans for each of those regions.
Is there, if we take Galway, is there a point where the EPA says that's okay, that can now be used as a park? We're finished. Have you a role in that?
Well, that's back to that regulation piece.
Yeah.
So when a historic landfill is coming into the EPA, part of that assessment will be what the plan is.
So there are 285 historic sites, is it?
Yes.
And 71 of those are in a priority A list. I'm not holding you to one or numbers.
Well, it's more, it's not, it's like everything, it's not that straightforward in that 71 are high priority, but not all. Some of those are those local authority sites that we regulate, but some of them are also what are called pre-1977 sites, so they're not due to be regulated. There are some of those that are illegal sites, and some of those that are private sites. So it's, it's not 71 of 285, it's 71 of 500 that are high.
Well, just again, can we maybe get a note from your point of view? We have the notes from the department, and when we put it together, I'll get the full picture of the jigsaw, and we'll just see. But it would be very helpful. Thanks very much.
Absolutely, we can send it on to you.
Thank you, Deputy Connolly. Just a few quick questions from myself. First of all, I have to say, probably echoing to some extent what Deputy Connolly said, it's a fine annual report. We've lots of organisations in here week in, week out, and it's one of the better reports we've seen. Not just in terms of your financial report, but I'm talking about the rest of the report. It covers a lot of area, and I can see how it takes a lot of work to get from the science down to readable English. And if I just might make one little comment, is the report for the non-technical bit, you could do with a glossary, right? Because I'm looking at page whatever, and I see control of air crew exposure. I don't know what that word means, you know, and if I don't know, other people might know. So, perfect, and I do notice that when you get to technical issues, maybe the first time you come across, and we have it ourselves here in this committee, you know, when you come up, I just read, you know, introduction to the role of Radiation Protection Officer, brackets RPO, but if you met the RPO 20 pages on, you don't know what the RPO is. So it's fine if you read it.
Director of Communication and Corporate Services, and I'll give you a commitment.
No, but I am complimenting the quality of the report. You know, it's very readable, and it's just from our own point. We often have to put in a glossary. We understand it, but maybe everybody else doesn't understand. And you might now tell me what's air crew about. It's well, what is? You have it's on page page 11.
Yeah.
Control of air crew exposure. Just tell me what it's about, because when I look at the chart next over the page, number of air crew, I don't know what it is, but it's twice as high as it was a few years ago in layman's English.
This is like This is fascinating, and maybe some of the work is we've taken on the radiological side of things. This is actually literally pilots in planes, and they've got specific pilots in planes.
Yeah. Okay.
And they've got specific exposure to types of radiation, depending on the number of flights that they go, because where they are in the atmosphere, there's a particular type of radiation.
So it is airline crew.
Yeah.
Airline crew.
And the reason increased
Pilots, and I hope the hosts and hostesses.
Yes, exactly.
It's everyone. Yeah. Okay.
And the reason increasing is there's more flights as well.
Oh.
So.
Yeah, but it's the percentage of flights. It seems to have gone up quite a lot.
Yeah. And that certainly, from talking to my colleagues, because this is something that has come up, that is very much so. I think the thing we need to be clear on is there is a responsibility and there is compliance with maximum levels that they have to be required to. But the number of aircrew you're seeing is really dramatically increased in total, but also then, of course, then the impact is increased as well.
Okay, and tell me, how many staff are covered by that research? How many air crew are we talking about?
God, I don't know.
I mightn't be there, but somebody can come back to me on.
I think, sorry, it's just, yeah.
It's 20,000.
20,000, yes, thank you.
And is there that's people? So, yes, so there are 20,000 people. Is that in Ireland or Irish-based airlines? Is it the Ryanairs and their staff abroad, or is it every flight that comes into Ireland? Is it just what happens in our shores or in our airspace? Or?
I'm turning to my radiation expert
you're
once more, might I mention. Yeah, but Tom, you have the answer there.
Just so we understand it.
Yeah, it's, as I understand, it's airlines that are registered in Ireland, so they have responsibility to report annually. The exposure we're talking about is cosmic radiation, so as you go higher in the air, you're more exposed to it, so it has to be monitored. In fact, most of the exposure is done by calculation, so you have set routes, say from Dublin to London or Dublin to Rome. You know, a standard flight has a standard exposure for individual crew.
So it's a calculated figure rather than an accounted figure.
Yeah.
Right.
But on models that are calibrated, and used throughout Europe.
So that 20,000 is based on so that includes Ryanair staff all over Europe that never come to Ireland. Have you the figures for what happens in our airspace? Or is it calculatable that way?
I'd have to come back to you on that.
Come back and send us a note. I know it's a small point, but it's
Absolutely.
when I see the chart there and I don't understand it, I ask the question. Okay?
We can break that down.
Yeah, just come back to us. Then on the same page, page 12, legal enforcement activities, you had fines in the district court, costs awarded, fines awarded, €390,000 in 17. Are those fines payable to you or to the courts? Where are the fines payable?
The district courts are payable to us, and in 2017 we had a recovery rate, I think, of 94.7%. Overall, we have I think if you combine 2016 to 18, we had a recovery rate of 97%. The DPP cases are different. The Director of Public Prosecution cases are different, and the vast majority, my understanding, is that goes to the state. So it's just a different...
collected by the court services?
Yes, yeah.
Right, and so you have no idea, you're not involved in the collection thereafter?
For the DPP, now... I'm sorry, but each one tends to be a little bit complicated. There was one specific case that was a DPP case, and that the fines were awarded to the agency. It was around €75,000, if I remember rightly, and we did get those. But in the other cases, it goes straight through to the Exchequer, and that's for the court service to manage.
And the reason I asked that is I had a parliamentary question in during the week, which was disallowed, asking about the number of fines or prosecutions taken into court by yourself, and the Minister said he's not responsible to the all for you. So I said, but I've asked that across all public bodies, because we have the court services coming in here in a couple of weeks' time, and we just want to see where fines from public bodies end up and collected. So you've answered your bit anyway.
If you don't mind me just mentioning, first of all of our prosecutions go up on the website, so they're all accessible, everybody can see them. The other thing is that the European Commission just published an environmental implementation review a week or two ago, looking at I suppose, overall compliance with environmental legislation across Europe for each member state. And one of the things they identified in Ireland is the fact that information on prosecutions is up on the EPA website, but maybe not all prosecutions are as easily available. So, for example, like wildlife crime and other things. So it is something that is I suppose, of interest, not only maybe to yourselves, but to others as well.
Okay, just moving on to your report. And your role in the river basement management plans, obviously yes. Water quality, and I know you have a page in there on that. In relation to the different river basement management plans in the country, I think there's 7 or 8 or whatever. I know my own area, the Barrow, the Nord, the Suir go into one area, and I'm sure the Shannon is another, and the Liffey. Which area is the area that poses most difficulty from the EPA's point of view? Which management plan?
Which management plan? Well, now, and I'm...
in terms of your role, not just in drawing up the plan, but in terms of water quality or whatever other issues you feel.
Okay, and I'm just going to, under the Water Framework Directive, my understanding now is that there's one national Water Framework Directive plan, implementation plan, with regard to areas of areas that are poorer. We issued a water quality report in November of last year, an overall water quality report, but what we were saying there was the overall decline of 3% and the reduction in pristine areas. I just don't have the quality report to hand. We more look at it from, well, so I suppose we look at it from a national level and say, like, is the water quality improving or declining? And we've seen a decline, mainly because of phosphorus and nitrogen. And then we look at high sites or kind of highly polluted sites, rather than kind of saying in each specific area, though all of that information is available in the water quality report. But then, as part of our role under the Water Framework Directive, is very much around the science, and we get down to the other extreme, which is each catchment, and looking at what pressures are in each individual catchment. And I'm going from memory, I think there's around 46 different catchments around the country. So it's kind of at a very local level, and then at quite a high level. But I can get that information. If you don't mind, it's not off the top of my head.
Yeah, because back a few years ago, it was a good plan. It got to do with flooding and everything more than anything. There were regional plans, I said, for the 3 rivers I mentioned and whatever, and there weren't that many, because every river ends up in the sea through some source. Yeah. But then I think somewhere during the Irish water issue, they got set aside to have one national plan for one national water agency or something. But the regional river basement management plans were a good idea, because they cover quite a geographic area, and I would hate to see that we're not going to continue to be able to get information on the river basement catchment area. You might just come back and give us an update on that. I don't have any specific issue, but
no, absolutely. And all of, like, I suppose I suppose in a very positive story, we did get resources to look much more at the science and the water quality in each catchment. We've done an enormous amount of work on that, engage with local authorities, and the local authorities themselves now have the local authority water catchment offices, the law codes, and there's 3 in the country, so kind of linking back to your 3 plans, who are looking at what actions can happen kind of at a local authority level to improve water quality, because it does tend to be agriculture and wastewater treatment being 2 of the big issues, and nitrogen and phosphorus, and there's things that can be done at a local level. That was,
if you don't mind me taking up on this, some of this can't be done at local authority level. That's why we have the river basement catchment areas, because when I take the Barrow, the Nord and the Suir, which is half of South Leinster, what happens in Laois affects what happens in Kilkenny and Waterford. So it's not a local authority specific function. The whole purpose of the regional plans is rivers go through various local authorities. So that's why the regional basis was a more holistic basis for looking at it, because they can do all they like in Waterford, but if we mess them up in Laois with the River Barrow,
depends where you are.
Yeah, so if they're downstream, so that's why I'm a fan of the catchment areas, because you get the full context of the entire river basin rather than local authority point of view. Anyway,
we can certainly come back.
Yeah, come back with a note. Then I see your environmental noise directive, and you talk about your mapping noise from major roads, and I see the local authorities are starting to do that. They have surveys out about areas where they think the roads are noisy, and we all spot Newlands Cross, the lovely soft noise when you're driving there versus when you get back to the old tarmac a mile further. I presume it's more expensive. But you mentioned airports. That was mentioned here as being going through that issue in relation to Dublin Airport. But how about noise in relation to wind farms and that issue? Have you a view on that? Or have you had a role there?
I know there is. Our role is limited with regard to wind farms. We don't regulate wind farms. It's
no, I'm only talking about noise.
But on the noise side of things, I know that there was guidelines being prepared, and we have inputted from a technical perspective, but we're an input rather than a producer of the guidelines. And my understanding is that they haven't been finalised as of yet. But certainly we've inputted to them from our expertise.
What you're saying is correct. We're hearing they're being finalised, and first they didn't do an environmental impact assessment of the policy. The department didn't know they should do that. That set them back a year. And then Europe raised some other issues with them last year that they should have foreseen, set them back another year. So your technical information will probably be historic by the time the department gets issued their plan. But anyway, in relation to the board, just a few questions about yourselves. I'm looking at the board here, you have 48 board meetings, because you're an unusual board from people who come here. You're an executive board, a bit like Board Connolly or some of the regulators. You don't have external people coming in to tell the experts once a month what they think you should be doing. That's fine. I understand the reason for that, and you have 35 technical meetings, so I presume they're kind of your in-house routine business. And you have. You might just give me an update on the changes on the board, because I presume you got a second 7-year term recently.
Yes, that was announced.
When was that?
So with regard to the changes on the board, so as you said, it was announced I got a second 7-year term that started from November 2018.
Okay.
With regard to 2017, when you look at page 68 of the report,
that's where I am,
you'll see that I'm there, then Dara Lynott, who has since retired, he had 2 terms. Gerard O'Leary is beside me. Micheál Canada had attended all of the board meetings. He has since retired in July of 2018. And Matt Crowe is still on the board. Micheál Lahan is still on the board. I take it
he got a second year.
Yes, I'm sorry. It was. He finished his second stint. Yeah, and so both Dara and Micheál, who've moved on, both had served 2 terms.
Okay. You might just send us the current board membership by way of correspondence.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure you could call it out off the top of your head.
We've got half of us here, but we'll get to the...
it's just for the completeness, because I know that's a little bit old, the list you have there in front of us. I have no issue with that. It ties into a couple of things here, and you have your advisory board, which is good. I just make a suggestion, and it's probably not for you, as for the department. I think there might be a cost, but I think an advisory board would benefit from having some people from outside of the state on it. They look to be all nominated by the IFA, National Youth Council, Radiation Research Society, because much of the environment issues they don't just stop at our shores, they're bigger than any individual country. So I suggest to the department you consider, if appropriate, having some people from outside the state. And that's only a personal observation. It's not a
and just on that, I might mention...
You understand where I'm coming at?
No, absolutely. And it is, I suppose, because the advisory committee, who are really useful to the agency, are appointed by the Minister. It's outside our gift. But where it is within our gift, which is the Audit and Risk Committee, and you'll see that on page 68 there, and specifically we had asked somebody from outside the state to be on the Audit and Risk Committee, and that's Alan Reid, who's from the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. And again, you see similar issues and challenges, so we found that very beneficial.
Okay, so the point is taken then. I just moving on to page 69, there's effectively legal fees of over $1 million there. Up on the top, legal advice, including financial provision of licensed activities, 561,000, and down below legal fees, legal proceedings, 440,000. Legal fees seems to be a big chunk of what I would call your discretionary spending when you take out salaries and pension contributions and everything like that. Would it be worth? Have you looked at employing some legal people internally, or is it all done externally? Is much of it routine that you could handle in-house if you hired?
Yeah, we have, and this has been a subject of a debate as well amongst ourselves. We've tended to try to source things that aren't our core capability, and you could end up with, you know, one person, but then if you've got a lot of, there tends to be peaks and troughs. You need an awful lot of legal opinion. Okay. One person isn't going to do it, whereas you can pull in that resource from outside. I would say as well, with regard to the legal costs, remember we got say in 2017 just close on €390,000 back of those costs. Okay. So it is not quite as high. It's just not recorded there. It's recorded in income. Okay,
and moving on to page 81 and the emissions. It's in the note to your accounts there under revenue emissions trading unit. You might send us a more expanded note on have there been fines issued in relation to the amount of money that came in or whatever. Together with the costs, I think you get refunded for your administration of that unit. Send us just a detailed note on the emissions trading unit and the level of activity and fines, etc., that might have gone through there. And then just have one or two minor other issues. Somewhere I see in the note that your strategic environment assessments in relation to major developments, you have a role on that. What's your role just... where does your role in terms of what's a major development? What does that mean?
It could be a new wind policy, for example. It could
these are not detailed planning applications?
No, they're at a higher level.
So it's at the policy. When I read that, when you said major development, I was wondering, was there a certain category of let's say strategic infrastructure that you'd have a look at? No.
It's what's deemed as plans and programmes. So it can be local development plans or it can be more national plans and programmes. And the idea is that that's done at kind of a significant level. And then with regard to planning and engagement with the planning authority, you'll see somewhere in the note we said we'd around 640 consultations, statutory consultations. That tends to be on individual planning, particularly if there's interconnection between a planning permission that's going to be for a licensed site.
Waste licence.
Yeah, there's engagement between Bord Pleanála, the local authority, and ourselves.
So it's primarily the waste licence that you have to license a facility and planning permission. And I'm going to ask you to send us a note, because previously I used to get confused as to which the applicant can go for first, the licence or the planning permission, and I think some use it one way, another use it another way. So send us a note of the current position in relation to those licensed facilities, because it often causes confusion. If they got their licence, went into local authority, Asher is licensed, give them their planning. I think we just want to know the current position.
That's fine.
Then in relation to EU fines, have we? I know you said there's always a potential, and there's cases there. Have we been hit with any European fines, or have we had to pay any to date? For environmental purposes?
Well, there have over the years, but I'm going to have to defer to the department, because we feed into cases and we give the Irish situation or the situation from the EPA perspective, but it is directly with the department as the state and the EU that engage. So
I'll ask the personnel from the department, can you send us a note on actual fines that we've actually paid in terms of environmental overall since we entered the EU?
That's quite it'd be a broad church. I can confirm for waste policy there haven't been, but that is just one narrow area, so I can...
Well, I'm only talking about within the remit of your department only, I'm not talking about the whole of government.
No, that's grand. So for Environment Division.
Well, on environmental purposes, because we continually, and I often think it's counterproductive, we say the big bad EU is going to fine us if we don't behave ourselves. And I actually believe at the end of the day that type of approach is damaging, because it's a bluff anyway. I don't think these fines ever really happen. We just keep threatening the people, and then people just don't listen to this stuff anymore. And I just want to get a bit of clarity. I know you say there may be possible fines if we don't, Pardon?
Are you putting your name into the hat for the EU?
A bit late now. I think nominations closed last Monday.
That's right.
Nominations closed last Monday.
It is a serious point, and it does come back to communications. And one of the things that we've looked at, certainly over the last number of years, in the context of communications, is rather than saying, for example, wastewater treatment is compliant or non-compliant with a directive, or air quality is compliant with a directive, actually explaining what the purpose of the directive is around protecting human health and the environment. Because otherwise, you are blaming the EU without explaining why.
But your approach is far more positive. We should be doing these things because it's good for us. Even if Europe never told us, we should be doing. It's the same old phrase, some tidy towns committees, and straying a bit, say we have to do up the place for the tourists. I say do it up to make it a nice place to live in, and the tourists will like it too when they come. You do it for the good reason, not because you're being threatened or there's a big bad wolf over there. Or I think we both understand what we're saying on that one. And then just in relation to the radon that you mentioned earlier, I know you have no statistics on, you can't really work out, but is there any country that's been dealing with the radon issue longer than us and maybe would have some international calculated figures rather than actual figures that you could use, use some other country that may have an example of what Deputy Connolly was asking about as an example of how this work on radon can be beneficial? Obviously, we haven't got it here yet. That's clear. But maybe somebody else could have some useful information, because it helps explain it to people. This national thing, it's a good idea. But if there's some kind of specific figures, people can relate to that. If it's available, have a look around, and you probably know, is there any international figures? And maybe not, I don't know. But
we certainly can, and we engage an awful lot at international level, because radon is an international, European international activity. So what we can do is we've done some kind of ex-post analysis of work in this area as well. So we can see what we have and then maybe what others have, and we'll definitely come back to you on that.
With whatever is there or not there, the case maybe. And then finally, kind of more onto the waste, we touched on the recycling, and you said the figures are improving all the time, or the amount going to landfill is decreasing, but quite a lot now is going in by way of, I call, heat to recovery, or the old-fashioned incinerator word, or waste to recovery biomass. Have you a role in relation to all these new applications that go in for, say, Burnamona is doing a big new biomass plant, or are you consulted on those issues for a licence?
Yes.
You have to licence all those?
A number of those will have to come into the agency for licensing, and we regulate, whether it be, as I said, a power plant looking at changing from, the materials they're using, etc. So a number of them will be into the agency. Yeah,
so they all have to come to you, and again, include that in the note. Is that before or after they get planning?
Yeah.
I don't know where in that whole process ye come in, at what stage are you, at the end or at the beginning, whatever.
And there has been changes, so we can.
And there have been changes. That's why I'm a little bit not sure, and would be helpful. Deputy Burke, I don't know. We've finished our business here, so thanks for coming in. But we'll finish up a bit early. So, to an extent, it's a compliment to the EPA that we're finished early. This is an early finish. It was a routine meeting for your annual financial statements. We chose to invite yourself. I'm not sure when you were here last, but you're a significant state organisation, and you've answered the questions put here very clearly and concisely without any particular difficulty. So, from our point of view, it was a good meeting, even though it's a short meeting, and that's primarily, and I want to stress this, you've been good witnesses. We get people here, the meetings drag on, that we can't get answers for, and meetings drag on and people get a little bit cross when they're not getting information. Didn't happen today, so we look forward to receiving the balance of the information that you'll forward to the Secretariat within the next fortnight. So at this stage, I do want to thank Ms Burke and your colleagues, together with the department staff, for being here today, and the CNAHE and his officials. So, and we agree that the clerk will seek any follow-up information and carry out the agreed actions we mentioned during the course of the meeting. And we will now adjourn CNADINA, but we will be meeting on the 9th of May, when we'll be meeting with Garda Síochána in relation to the Vote 20 and Garda Síochána accounts for 2017 and a report on the accounts of public service, the CNAG chapter number 7, dealing with the management of overtime expenditure in Garda Síochána. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.